we see a man riding a horse that appears very tired and wounded. Suddenly, a bush moves. A deer emerges from the bush and the horse gets startled. The horse rears up and throws the man to the ground. The man screams as he falls to the ground. He injures his body even more. He looks at his horse. The animal is frightened. It takes off in a rush, and the man yells for his animal to come back. The man is ignored and curses loudly. He tries to get up and finds a notebook. The notebook is kept in his clothing. He is determined to survive. The man stands up and says he will return. Next, the scene shifts to the master's grand castle. A man announces to his boss that someone took the record. Kangxian is sitting on a throne and asks if it is true. He asks who it was. The advisor making the announcement informs him that it was the captain of the Wolf Blood clan named Yeonjeomho. Kangxian asks if this was not the young man assigned to the mission. The advisor confirms, and then the master questions about the Black Wind clan. The advisor responds that they all perished at the hands of the Shadow Dragon squad. Kangxian is surprised, questioning how the boy managed to survive when even the Black Wind clan did not. The advisor states he does not know how this was possible, and Kangxian, still on the throne, says he needs to see the record. He asserts that he needs to be with the boy. We are now in the Hall of the Thousand Dragons. We see Yeonjeomho kneeling. He is before the Great Master, who is sitting on the throne reading the record book the young man carried. Then the master asks if our hero knows what book he took. The protagonist responds that the book is a record with information about the Sanguine Group's network. The man sitting on the throne then asks if he knows how much money was spent to compile that record. Kneeling, Yeonjeomho responds that he does not know the exact amount but has an idea of how many people died to protect that book. Kangxian asks how many it was. The protagonist replies that it was 225 people. Surprised, Kangxian understands the sacrifice involved in protecting that book and is impressed that Yeonjeomho survived alone. Our hero, still perplexed, wonders how he managed to survive on his own. Then the scene changes to the interior of the Blood Palace, where we see men fighting. One of them shouts to capture the intruder. We are amid chaos. A blow is aimed at our warrior's face, but he dodges the thrust. He counterattacks. At that moment, several swords are launched in his direction. Fortunately, he manages to defend himself with agile maneuvers. While facing the adversaries, the wolf squad asks their leaders to flee while they cover the rear. They obey, and a fierce confrontation unfolds behind those escaping. A giant cleaver is thrown towards someone. Our hero counters the blow. The man with the cleaver blocks the escape of those who were fleeing and threatens them. With a downward strike, he attacks. He is aiming at the protagonist. The vice president runs desperately, shouting. He shields the protagonist with his own body. In a moment of rage, Jeomho attacks the individual in front of him. The sword strike, in turn, is fatal. At this moment, we see the protagonist's subordinate on the ground, asking him to kill him. The protagonist refuses, but his subordinate insists and says he will not survive. Reluctantly, he draws his sword towards his friend's chest. He plunges the weapon into the man. With tears and anger on his face, we see the suffering of our protagonist. The scene shifts to the master's castle. The Great Master asks his advisor Bai Gachu if there is any vacant position. He announces that there is a commander position for the Black Panther squad. The man above the throne tells him to give the position to the boy, and his attendant is surprised. His advisor says that the boy is not old enough to be a commander. Kangxian asks Jeomho if he would like to take the position, and our protagonist says yes, willing to take that position in his hands. In the armory, we see someone slamming their fist on a table. We can observe the vice commander of the Black Panther squad visibly displeased with the appointment of our protagonist. Another individual in the room with white hair remarks that the barbarians are doing as they please. Yet another with spiked hair questions if this wretch will really be their commander, rejecting the idea. They are then informed that it was a direct order from the lord of those lands. The outraged vice commander exclaims in frustration. A woman named Chugua tells the man that he's angry about losing the chance to become the official commander and asks if that's really the issue. She continues, saying he boasted, believing he would be the next commander. The man orders her to stay silent. Turning away, she says she was eager to meet the new commander. Suddenly, a man rushes into the room and everyone is surprised. The man shouts for everyone to gather outside. Reluctantly, they comply. They all stand at attention. They see the counselor with our hero by his side. The counselor introduces their new commander, Yeonjeomho, to the squad. Some men there are surprised by how young he is. The counselor leaves, saying he'll let them talk and get acquainted. At this moment, the men who had been complaining now glare at him with resentment. Our hero approaches to greet the vice commander, who has his hands on his hips. Sighing, he says it's ridiculous. He remarks that the newcomer barely arrived and is already acting like a boss. He declares that he should teach him not to become arrogant. Looking at Yeonjeomho, he says he doesn't know what tricks he used, but it will be hard for them to accept him. Our protagonist looks at him seriously. He questions if this attitude is insubordination. The vice commander looks back with an arrogant expression. He questions if someone from the Wolf Blood clan has the right to talk about insubordination. Preparing to draw his sword, the protagonist says he hates having to settle this difference with a fight. The men there are startled. However, the man with the goatee, already drawing his weapon, asks if he's challenging him, eager for a confrontation. Our hero breaks off a branch. He reveals that a piece of wood will be enough to face a mere dog. They both prepare for the fight, facing each other closely as the protagonist throws the stick near him. He asks his opponent not to regret this. The vice commander makes the first move, pushing off the ground with his right foot after grabbing the stick from the ground. He tells the newcomer that the hero shouldn't think he's the best. Thus, the fight fully begins. The challenger comments that his commander has fast footwork. He tries to strike him with an upward blow, but the protagonist dodges with great ease. The vice commander launches 3 quick consecutive strikes, but our hero dodges each one. Frustrated, the man shouts, asking how long he'll keep running. At that moment, the protagonist finds an opening and threatens a fatal strike to his throat. He decides only to hit his shoulder with the stick, showing superiority in combat. The infuriated vice commander calls Jeomho a wretch. He charges with fury, saying he'll kill him. Our hero keeps dodging the attacks. Taking advantage of an opening, he strikes the opponent's ribs with a powerful blow. He ends up leaving him breathless. Without mercy, Jeomho prepares to finish the fight. His stick is suddenly blocked by his sword. We then see a blonde-haired woman who asks him to stop because the fight is already over. The vice commander falls unconscious to the ground. The victor asks if anyone else is interested in fighting him. Everyone keeps their heads down. With that, our hero reveals that he learned to fight by going to and from hell and tells them not to fight him with those lousy martial arts. Turning to the woman who prevented him from finishing off the man, he says that from now on, she will be the new vice commander. He takes the badge from the man on the ground. He hands her the badge and she feels embarrassed by the situation. The protagonist highlights the courage she showed in defending her comrade, emphasizing that she stands out compared to those who remain submissive. With that, he turns and leaves. Our hero arrives at a door. He reflects that he needs to control himself, focusing on his breathing. He removes his attire. He thinks his ki is about to explode from the little use of his martial arts. In a memory, Jeomho receives something from a woman. She tells him it will elevate his martial abilities to a very high level, but that it can control his veins with Hwanden. Jeomho thinks he needs to manage his ki without using pills. He asserts that he will master this power. This is to save that girl, recalling the Blood Palace. Our hero is running through its corridors. We see him injured. He wonders where the record is. At this moment, as he advances, our hero encounters 2 masked men with swords who see him. However, Jeomho is already prepared for combat. With that, the 2 advance for the protagonist. Striking a blow, he thinks he must end this as quickly as possible. He manages to overpower one of the men, who falls as a result. The other receives a blow from our hero. Thus, we see that both end up being incapacitated by Jeomho. He moves forward through the place, extremely exhausted, stating that he needs to find the record as he advances. We see that, in a corridor, a woman seems to be waiting for him. But the protagonist falls due to exhaustion. He ends up being helped by carrying hands. Now we see that it is the woman who was waiting for him. Both now in a calmer place where they could rest, we see our hero lying down. He is receiving a pill in his mouth. As he swallows, he wakes up, and the woman is surprised that he woke up so quickly. She says she is a spy from the Great Master's castle and asks where the Iron Demons group is, as the plan was for her to meet them. With a sad expression, our hero says that they did not come. We can see the look of hopelessness on the woman's face. Sadly, she realizes that they were not even thinking of saving her. She takes out a book from her clothing. She hands the record to Jeomho and asks him to leave with that book. He asks how she got the book. She explains that she took it earlier to deliver it to the Iron Demons because she gained the trust of an elder, so there would be no suspicion of her. Jeomho asks for them to leave that place together. But with his sad voice, she says that if they go together, they will both end up dead and that this record must reach the castle. Only then will her family survive. At that moment, we see several soldiers heading toward our hero. He quickly realizes their arrival. As he turns, the woman wishes him good luck in his endeavor. Before leaving, Jeomho asks for her name. She responds that she has forgotten her own name and hopes she does not have to live like this. She then moves down the corridor. Jeomho shouts that he will come back to save her. The woman responds with a slight smile. Our hero decides that he must first return to the Great Master's castle. He plans to use his ability to increase his power. With that, a massive aura emerges from his body. His expression darkens. The atmosphere around him releases an enormous power. The men who were searching for him appear and authoritatively announce they have found him. Jeomho invites them to battle. He advances, slicing through them all. The scene shifts and we see our hero meditating in his room. At that moment, he spits blood. He falls to the ground. He realizes he still cannot control his ki and ended up losing concentration. Remembering his comrades, he wonders how he will be able to face them like this. Now lying down and coughing blood in his room, he thinks he hears something. A voice speaks to him, saying that even if he understood everything wrong, he is alive and asks the protagonist to accept him as his master because he will help him. At that moment, Jeomho asks who he is. The voice continues, telling our hero to become the disciple of the divine archer. But even on the ground and bloody, he says that no matter who the person behind the voice is, he will not accept them as his master. The voice calls him ungrateful. At that moment, he begins to writhe in pain. The voice asks again if Jeomho will accept him as his master, but our hero still refuses. The voice calls him an idiot, and the protagonist continues to suffer and feel pain. Finally, he loses consciousness. In the armory division, which appears to be the next day, we see our hero lying on the ground. The vice commander is calling for him. The protagonist begins to wake up. She asks if he knows about the welcoming ceremony. She wonders if he is really in that place or not. Then she thinks something is wrong and calls for the commander. She shouts that she will enter and prepares to kick the door. Jeomho responds, saying he will attend the ceremony soon. The vice commander says they will wait for him, and our protagonist agrees. Thinking, the vice commander finds the situation strange as it has been 3 days since Jeomho has been inside that room. In the inner courtyard of the armory division, We see some men clearly angry and fighting. One of them says it's just a boy from the Wolf Blood clan provoking him. Soon, one of the men receives a blow, followed by another who appears and kicks our protagonist's subordinate. The subordinate quickly reacts, kicking both of them simultaneously, creating an impact that pushes them away. He reveals that they now belong to the Black Panther squad and no longer to the Wolf clan, and it was the others who started the fight. At that moment, the two men charge at the subordinate and begin throwing blows. One of them throws punches, the other defends himself. Then one of them starts a sequence of kicks. He then receives a blow to his face. He is surprised by what happened. The fat man blames our hero's subordinate and questions how the Black Panther squad dares to raise its head. He says the former commander embezzled money, the new one is just a boy, and he ridicules the fact that the vice commander is a woman. Clenching his teeth, the white-haired man tells him not to use such weak arguments. Approaching the man on the ground, the fat man says that he has become bolder since becoming a subordinate of our protagonist. He yells at him not to dishonor his commander. With that, we see the fat man about to hit our hero's subordinate, calling him a scoundrel. But the man's hand is stopped. We see that it was Jiyomo who stopped him. His subordinate is surprised by the presence of his leader. The man is also surprised. At that moment, our hero tells the man that if he has matters to settle, he should settle them with him. And that fat man thinks the protagonist is strong and cannot move. Our protagonist continues, saying that he will handle anyone who messes with a Black Panther this way. He then breaks the man's arm, bending it into an L shape. The fat man, desperate, starts screaming. He begins to writhe in pain. However, our hero shows no reaction. The man then falls to the ground due to the pain. Those around are shocked by the scene. With that, Jiyomo simply turns and walks away. In the next scene, we see our hero alone in what appears to be a small cabin in the middle of the forest. At this moment, he is assessing his physical condition. He notices that his blood flow is better and that his ki is no longer exploding. While meditating, he realizes that if he focuses on controlling his mind, his veins no longer react. He wonders if he can truly control this power if he can control his mind, and asks himself what that voice was. Now in the Hall of the Thousand Dragons, we see the Great Master speaking with his advisor about the protagonist. He asks if he should laugh or be angry because he is genuinely curious to know if he really broke the arm of the Green Tiger's leader. His advisor confirms that this happened and also says that the moment he became commander, he took control. He reveals that demonstrating his strength will make the other squads stay away. The Great Master, pleased, says that he was right and that our protagonist is indeed impressive. We then see him walking close to the window of his palace. Observing our protagonist from there, he thinks that the only problem is that he is unpredictable. We then see young woman beside him who reveals herself as his daughter, the fourth princess of the Great Master's castle, Oyurin, who asks what her father is looking at so intently. The man sees Yurin and says he didn't see her come in. She asks why he is acting that way. He says there is nothing wrong and asks what she wants, as she was looking at him with a pleading expression. She says that if anyone hears that, it might think she is spoiled. The Great Master jokingly asks if she really isn't. However, she calls her father to sit, and she seats him in a chair. She gives him a neck massage. She asks if it is relaxing. The Great Master questions her, wanting to know her real intentions. At that moment, she reveals that it is a request from the bottom of her heart. Her father says that the Yurin he knows would not be so formal and asks if what she wants is money. She starts to express her request. She turns and kneels before her father. She says she would like to attend the Dragon Lance Dance competition that will take place in Luoyang. Her father, biting his lips, denies the request. She begs with a sad look, saying she really wants to go, but he confirms that he will not let her. Indignant, she huffs. He explains that the current situation is not good, and as he has already said, that will not change. Pouting, she stands up and turns around. Frustrated, Yurin says that he has been repeating the same thing for 15 years. She turns her back on her father and leaves the room. She slams the door shut. The Great Master puts his hand on his head, tired of his daughter's stubbornness. The scene then shifts to the banquet hall of the Armory Division. There, the entire Black Panther squad, led by our protagonist, is gathered. One of the subordinates comments that thanks to the captain, the squad's position has greatly improved. The one who was previously protected states that from now on, no one will attack or bother them anymore. Another man suggests that they pledge loyalty to the commander and make a toast in his name. Everyone raises their cups of sake. Jiyomo appears a little embarrassed. Our protagonist also holds a cup of sake and drinks. When everything seems calm, someone kicks the door open. It's Yurin. She is looking for Jiyomo. Jiyomo stares at Yurin. He questions who this young woman really is. She then responds that this is the first time someone has asked who she is. The vice captain of the squad calls the protagonist's attention. She says that this is Yurin, the fourth princess of the Great Master's castle. Jiyomo greets her, stating that he is the commander of the Black Panther squad. She then summons him, asking him to step outside because she wants to talk to him. Our protagonist doesn't fully understand the situation, but when she turns, he follows her. In the garden of the Armory Division, they stand side by side. He looks at her staring. He asks what she would like to talk to him about at that moment. She responds that she would like to see something. He asks what it would be. She then looks back at him standing in front of him. Not understanding what is happening, he is surprised and stands still. She says she would like to know why her father admires him so much. And what is his secret? She wants to know, trying to grab his arm. But our protagonist pulls away from her touch. He responds that if she has nothing to say, he will leave because the others are waiting for him. As he is about to leave, she says she wants to talk to him about something. He turns back. She says she will be direct and asks him to take her to the Dragon Lance dance martial arts competition in Luoyang. He questions why she would ask this of him. She says she doesn't know, she just wants him to help her in her small rebellion against her father. At that moment, we see that something is happening as our protagonist seems alert. Jiaomo stretches his arm to reach Yuren. Some kunes are being thrown in their direction. Jiaomo manages to dodge them, taking Yuren with him. The kunes hit the ground. Now with his body over hers, he is protecting her. He shouts, asking who is there, and she complains about what he is doing. At that moment, our hero looks in a certain direction and demands that the person reveal themselves. We see a man fleeing from a bush, apparently the attacker. He then tells the Great Master's daughter to stay there. He charges toward the individual who attacked her. She wonders what those hidden kumes were. She becomes furious because someone attacked her in her own garden. In the forest, our protagonist is pursuing the one who threw the kumes. We see that our protagonist is close to catching the man. He grabs a knife he has with him and throws it toward the mysterious man. However, at that moment, the man manages to dodge it easily. Our protagonist is frustrated at not being able to hit him. The man, whose identity remains unclear, lands on the ground. He draws his weapon. Our protagonist was already moving toward him, aiming for a downward strike. With his sword, he targets the man's head. But the opponent dodges easily, and the sword only hits the ground. Now the man is attacking our protagonist, and they engage in a sword fight. Jiaomo realizes that the mysterious man is not mediocre with a sword. The shadowy attacker tries to thrust his sword at our hero. He manages to dodge. He notices that the martial techniques of this man are from the Great Master's castle. At that moment, a voice shouts for him to move aside. Both are surprised. We see that it is the Great Master's daughter, Yuren. She enters the battle with a fierce attack but hits the ground, destroying it. She declares that she will fight him. At this moment, pointing her sword at the individual, she warns him that she will battle him. The mysterious man, realizing the situation, turns his back. He tries to flee once again. She orders him to stop, shouting. As she runs toward him, Jiaomo notices that she has a strong energy and wonders if this energy is due to her rigorous training since childhood. He then leaps toward them. We see that he is close to reaching the Great Master's daughter. She says that at this moment it's no use chasing that man. She announces that her techniques are well developed in Qigong, which is the skill of balance. Jiaomo asks why he would attack Yuren, and she reveals that she is not sure. Our hero questions if she has no idea who he might be, but Yuren says she has spent her entire life in the palace, so she hasn't met enough people to make enemies. The protagonist advises her to be careful, as it seemed like someone from the castle, and she asks if he is afraid. Looking at his face, she thinks he looks cute. Yuren gives him a kiss on the cheek to thank him. She verbally thanks him for saving her. At this moment, the scene changes to the castle walls. We see the mysterious man landing on a platform. He removes his hat, and we realize he is the subordinate of the Great Master of the tower. His advisor states that he almost got caught. Then, in the Palace of 1,000 Dragons, we see the darkened expression of the Great Master. He asks the man how it went. His advisor reveals that he threw some kunes, and that she must have been frightened. But the Great Master questions the use of kunes and asks what he would have done if he had hit her. The man reveals that he threw them in a way that Yuren could dodge them on her own. The Lord of those lands then says he did not order him to attack her, only to scare her so she would stop wanting to go to that competition. At that moment, the advisor reveals that the commander of the Black Panther squad managed to block the attack, so he didn't even get close to injuring her. The man sitting on the throne asks if the commander was with his daughter. The advisor confirms that yes, she sought him out herself. The Great Master sighs. In the Armory Division, we see our hero meditating. He appears to be making a great effort, with veins bulging on his face and arms and sweat dripping down his body. In this state, Jiaomo begins to have a vision, a light in the midst of darkness. He wonders what that is and if it's someone's memory. In the Celestial Palace, a great war unfolds before him with various martial artists fighting to the death. Jiaomo, observing the scene, wonders what is happening. Amid the chaos, we see an old man with long white hair taking down men as if they were mere insects. He is overwhelmingly dominant in that battle. Wherever he passes, men perish. In that place, we see our protagonist stepping over some fallen bodies. He steps forcefully. The blood of the fallen stains the protagonist's clothing. We have a view of the battlefield. 3 men lay fallen before the old man. The old man looks at our protagonist. He asks if he still refuses to accept him as his master. Jiaomo, surprised, says nothing for the moment. The man laughs. Our protagonist says he doesn't know who he is but asks him to reveal his identity. The powerful old man laughs and tells our protagonist that he is brave. He also says he likes him. At that moment, our protagonist has another vision. In the law enforcement division inside the Jade prison, Jiaomo is kneeling in front of someone. He is surprised and bewildered. The man standing before him is the same elder from before. Our hero wonders where he is now. The elder asks him to follow. They start walking through a place that seems like a castle or an abandoned dungeon. They descend stairs. The elder passes through a gate. Jiaomo still doesn't understand where he is, until he comes across a scene that shocks him. First, he sees a chained hand, then a torso. Finally, he sees the body of an old man, chained and wounded with his head lowered. His hair covers his face. At that moment, he approaches. He realizes it is the same elder who previously asked him to follow. He asks Jeomho to follow his voice. As he stares at him, his eyes shine. The glow intensifies. Now in the dormitory of the Armory Division, the protagonist wakes up from his supposed trance, startled and surprised. With this, they understand that the person who spoke to him is imprisoned in the Jade Prison, and that he needs to go there to confirm this. Now in the training area, which appears to be another day, we see several men practicing their martial arts. The vice commander of the Black Panther squad says that today is the day to meet Oh Jae-hyun. Our hero asks if this is really a good time, and she asks if he is nervous since it was Oh Jae-hyun himself who arranged this meeting. With a serious expression, our protagonist reveals that he is aware of this. In the blue circles, there are several men eating. A man smiling looks surprised in a certain direction. Then our protagonist appears, introducing himself and stating that he is Eun Jeomho, the commander of the Black Panther squad. The man smiling at him says there is no need to be so formal and offers him a cup of sake. He says they will drink a lot tonight. At that moment, they wish each other good health. As they drink, our hero thinks he needs an opportunity to take the man's identification tag. Later that night, in that place, our protagonist seems a little drunk. The man who was drinking with him tries to help and asks if he is okay. At that moment, with a stealthy and quick movement, our protagonist appears to take something from his waist. Jeomho says he's going out to get some air. Then, out on the street, we see that the identification he carries is Oh Jae-hyun's identity insignia, the Archduke of the castle. With that, he thinks he must enter the Jade Prison, and jumping across rooftops, he heads in that direction. In the enforcement division at the Jade Prison, we see a man who appears to be a guard. He asks what this man intends to do there. We then see our protagonist in disguise. He shows an identity to the bald guard. However, the guard says he wasn't informed of anyone coming to that place. Our protagonist says it was a direct and emergency order. The bald guard says he never received such an order, so he must return quickly and bring a formal visitation request. But Jeomho asks if he is refusing the order of the bearer of the Yellow Dragon tag. We then see both of them descending a staircase. They reach a dungeon. The protagonist asks to be left alone because the order he received was to keep his conversation confidential. The guard says that is impossible. Our hero, bluffing, says he has the authority to kill anyone who disobeys the bearer of that tag. With that, the guard leaves frustrated, and at that moment, Jeomho looks relieved. Jeomho approaches the cell. When he touches it, he observes the man with white hair and multiple stakes piercing his body. The man, apparently speaking in his mind, tells our protagonist that he took a long time and asks if he came to learn the verse of resonance. The protagonist, wondering what that is, questions if this is the name of the chant he learned and asks the man who he is. The man with glowing and piercing eyes tells our protagonist to answer his question first. At this moment, our hero says he learned it in the Blood Palace. The old man looks surprised by this response. Seemingly both enthusiastic and enraged, he asks if it was really the Blood Palace. Our protagonist is overwhelmed by the old man's wave of anger, needing to cover his ears. The old man shouts that Ganya Mundo will kill him and calls him a scoundrel. The old man says he doesn't have much time and that he will pass the verse of resonance to the boy. The protagonist asks what is happening. At that moment, they both meditate together. Their auras resonate. The guard announces that the protagonist's time is up. Our hero, turning his back on the man, sees that he is smiling, and in his mind, the man tells him to return. With that, our protagonist turns his back on the man. In the blue circles, our protagonist appears in the presence of the man from whom he previously stole. He casually drops the man's identification on the ground. The man asks if our hero is okay and says he almost sent someone after him because he was worried. Jeomho says he is fine. He picks up the insignia from the ground. Handing it to the man, he asks if it belongs to him. The man seems surprised by this gesture, and our hero, without words and sweating nervously, waits for the man's response. However, the man begins to laugh, wondering how it ended up there and that something bad could have happened. At this moment, the man looks seriously at our hero. In the Armory Division, our protagonist is meditating, following the old man's advice, overflowing his energy to control his ki. In his mind, he thinks that even if his ki explodes, he will not lose focus and that this technique must be from the Celestial Palace. Our hero hears the old man in his mind saying that this is how it should be done, and our protagonist asks him not to interfere in his mind. Then the voice says it will reveal who he is. With that, our protagonist has a vision. In a grand palace surrounded by forests, the man begins to tell his story of how he ended up there. He says he was the first disciple of Ganya Wugi, the master of the Celestial Palace. At the age of 30, he mastered the verse of resonance to become the next leader. We then see an old man handing a sword to someone kneeling. In the same scene, we see someone appearing outraged by this, and the voice continues, saying that Ganya Mundo, the son of Ganya, did not accept him as the next leader. He says that under his leadership, the Celestial Palace wielded power to control the entire central plane. We then see that man, now older, appearing to have mastered many things, and he continues, explaining that he tried his best to pass on his skills to others. We see him writing on scrolls. He mentions that then something happened. We see him in the middle of a war. We see Ganya saying they are close to defeating the traitor and that he is already exhausted. Then we see the old man who was in prison shouting that they are the traitors. Many men with crazed eyes and uncontested rage rush toward the old man. He tells them to come at him with a fierce look. Several men with blades prepare to attack the lone man. At that moment, the old man uses a sword strike, managing to land the blow on 3 men simultaneously. With that, all those attacking him are cut down by his power. The remaining men, frightened and terrified, become paralyzed with fear, unable to react. At this moment, the old man charges toward them with his sword. He begins to strike each of them. The men, shaking off their fear-induced paralysis, start fleeing, calling him a monster. The old man, maddened with rage, leaps from where he stands. He goes after each of them. He uses his sword to hunt down and slaughter them one by one. Then, when all seem to be dead, the old man faces his traitor, Ganya. His traitor is terrified. The old man shouts his name, saying that now it is his turn. The traitor, with a desperate look, wonders when they will arrive. At that moment, the old man looks behind him. He sees men in red cloaks. They wear masks with different symbols and have a bloodthirsty gaze. He looks at them but shows no reaction. Ganya Mundo is relieved as they have finally arrived. Those men leap from their vantage point and head toward the long-haired elder. At this moment, the elder begins to use his key power and aura. The men draw their swords and point them at the elder. They prepare their swords, taking aim. At that moment, the elder unleashes a powerful strike with his sword toward the hooded men. His blow is strong, pushing the hooded men back. One of them aims his sword at the white-haired man. His sword is split by the elder's force. He targets the tip of his intact sword and pierces the stomach of an enemy. Some of them seem defeated. However, their leader makes a gesture. The others follow him like a pack. They move in harmony from side to side. They begin circling the old man. At that moment, one of the hooded men attempts to attack him from behind. The elder's reflex is quicker, and he cuts him in half. Realizing it was just an illusion, we see another attempting to strike him at that moment. With this, he manages to wound the man at the level of his ribs. The old man feels the blow. Several frenzied attacks from all sides start hitting him, cornering him. However, he still manages to retaliate. At that moment, a man attempts to deliver the final blow, but the elder does not give up. He manages to kill one of his attackers. However, as he attacks, another appears behind him and strikes with his palm. The elder falls. He is dazed. One of the hooded men pushes him. Everyone on the battlefield celebrates this supposed victory. At this moment, the hooded men grab the elder. In the armory division, our hero is meditating. Someone calls out, saying that the second princess, Osurin, is urgently summoning him. He wakes up from his meditation and wonders what's happening. In the Hall of 1,000 Dragons, we see our protagonist presenting himself to the second princess. He asks why he was summoned. She says that her sister, Yurin, has disappeared. He realizes that this is the mission, this is the problem. She asks why he doesn't seem surprised. With that, our hero responds that she asked him to take her to a martial arts competition, and her sister understands that she must have gone to Luan alone. Desperate, the second princess asks Jiyomo to find Yurin. He asks why she chose him. She says she knows he was the one who retrieved the record from the Blood Palace. She reveals that, as he managed to complete this mission alone, he must have extremely strong and useful skills. Our hero feels honored by her words, and she adds that her father agreed that he should be the one to find Yurin. Jiyomo agrees to carry out the mission and will depart the next day. The second princess wishes him good luck and he leaves. The protagonist thinks that this might be a good opportunity since he will have the chance to meet that old man again and finish what they started last time. At the Jade Prison, we see the old man still chained. He senses our hero's presence. Facing him, Jiyomo stares. The old man smiles and says that his disciple must already be accustomed to the resonance chant. Standing up, the old man says he will pass on everything he knows. With a commanding pose and gaze, he asks his disciple to come closer. With these words, our protagonist asks the old man why he is doing this for him, and the old man says it is probably a matter of destiny. He asks our hero to untie the bindings of the stakes embedded in his body. He tells him to do it quickly because there is not much time. He instructs the protagonist to remove everything at once, and that he will manage on his own. Grabbing a thread, Jiyomo prepares himself and pulls out all the stakes from the old man's back in one swift motion. Our hero pulls them out with a quick movement, managing to remove them all at once. We then see that the elder uses a technique and seemingly manages to stop the bleeding. Seeing this, Jiyomo is impressed. The old man says he will activate the Pact of Resonance. At that moment, our protagonist begins to activate his key power. The old man does the same. The elder places his hand on our hero's back. He starts to scream, as he appears to be transferring something to Jiyomo. We witness what seems to be the Pact of Resonance. The old man warns our hero not to faint as he will perish if he does, since his veins will pulse until he dies. At that moment, Jiyomo forces himself to remain conscious. The elder uses his ability on the protagonist but loses his strength to stand. The old man falls to his knees. Our protagonist becomes concerned, calling the elder old man. The elder asks if it isn't time for him to start calling him master. Jiyomo asks if he is alright. The elder says that this is all he can do but asks our hero to survive by his own strength. At that moment, someone says they are approaching. We see people entering the corridors of the prison. Jiyomo notices. He says someone is heading their way and that they must leave. Grabbing our hero's arm, the old man says he will pass on his final lesson and asks him not to be bound to any place, to be free and live like the wind. Jiyomo questions the elder about what that means. At that exact moment, the old man's eyes lose their shine. Jiyomo, with sadness, murmurs that he hopes his master rests in peace. Next, we see hurried footsteps. Men approach the cells. Among them is the great master, who asks the man beside him if someone with such an important identity was really there. The man confirms that yes, and that he did not send anyone there. The guard, realizing something is wrong. He looks at the dead, kneeling elder. He approaches and checks the elder's pulse. He confirms that he has indeed passed away. With that, the Great Master says that, as An Woojuk said, he was no different from the others and questions if he died after passing his abilities to another person. The guard reveals that the intruder was there for only 15 minutes, not enough time for that. Outside the prison, we see Jiomo. He questions whether there was someone who valued him more than their own life, and he places a conviction in his heart that he will follow his master's will as a disciple of the Celestial Palace. Back in the Honorary Division, we see that Jiomo has summoned his vice commander. He informs her that he has received a mission from the higher-ups and will need to leave the castle. The vice commander questions what he means by this. He asks her to relay this information to the members of the squad. At that moment, the vice commander tries to say that he hasn't been there for long, and our hero thanks her for everything she has done. Turning his back, he asks her to take care of the squad in his absence. She calls out to him. He turns to look back. She pays her respects to him and says that it is they who should be grateful for everything he has done. With that, Jiomo feels satisfied with everything that has happened, and he leaves the lands of the Great Master to embark on his mission. He looks back one last time, takes a deep breath. Now far from the palace, he wonders if it is his fate to live like the wind. He thinks that although his master told him not to stay tied to any place, he will seek vengeance in his name. In the garden of the Hall of the Thousand Dragons, we see a man asking if Jiomo went to look for urine. A woman confirms this and calls him brother. The son of the Great Master thinks he knows Jiomo is capable but doesn't fully trust him. The woman asks why he is suspicious since Jiomo has already earned their father's trust. The man confirms this and asks how long it has been since he left. She reveals that it has been 15 minutes. The man then says he will also step out for a bit, in a forest far from that location. We see our protagonist sensing a presence. He perceives a blade being aimed at his back. He intercepts the blade and asks his attackers who they are. We see several men with swords and masks who do not reveal their names. At that moment, one of them attempts to strike toward his face, but our hero dodges. Using his own body's weight, he swings his sword toward one of their heads. However, one of the men protects his companion. At this moment, he realizes they have good coordination together. All the attackers move toward him simultaneously. At that moment, he looks up and notices someone observing. It is the son of his master, wondering if it's possible to tell if Jiomo is hiding his abilities with those slow attacks. The battle continues. One of the men attacks Jiomo, who grazes the man's arm but continues dodging the attacks from his enemies. He thinks they must be testing him because the attacks don't seem intended to kill him. And he thinks they don't seem very strong, but he believes the resonance pack he received has worsened his technique. With that, the three men attack him simultaneously with several rapid strikes. Our hero retreats to gain more space in the area. He has a plan. Jiomo turns and enters the tall grass nearby, leaving the men surprised. One of them orders the others to start searching for the protagonist. Several of them enter the grass. One of them seems to sense a presence. Stealthily, Jiomo attacks one of the men in the grass. The man cries out in pain. The observer from the tree notices the action. He concludes that Jiomo does not hesitate to use low techniques. In response, he orders the men to disperse. They flee. The protagonist sheaths his weapon. He thinks that this should be enough for that man. In a large city, our protagonist tries to stop at a location. Inside, it appears to be an inn. One of the men at the door asks if he is alone, and he confirms. The man with a mustache asks if he minds sharing a table as the place is crowded. Jiomo responds that he doesn't mind. He just wants to quench his thirst. The man asks him to follow. Next, we see another person asking a woman sitting at a table if she would mind sharing the space. She responds that she doesn't, and we see that it's a woman with light hair wearing a diadem on her head. With that, our protagonist approaches and sits at the table. The woman accompanying him offers him a drink. He thanks her. She introduces herself as Moyang Seolji from the Moyang family. Our hero also introduces himself as Eun Jeomho and says he is just a wanderer. She asks what brought him to the city, and he says he is simply looking for someone. She then asks if he intends to gather information from people in inns or competition halls. He thinks that asking in inns might help in his search for urine. She says she will take her leave as she has other duties, and our hero says he enjoyed her company. He reflects on the woman Seolji and realizes she has a rather unusual aura. At the White Poplar residence, we see someone placing a cup on the table. We see two people, one of them an extremely strong elder. It is revealed that the elder is the patriarch of the Verdant Forest faction, and he asks his companion how she dares accuse him of assisting the sanguinary group. We see that the person is Seolji, and she says that all circumstances point to him and questions if his faction has nothing to do with the sanguinary group. The man considers her extremely bold. He grabs an axe and throws it in her direction. The object passes by the side of her face. However, it destroys the tree just behind her. She shows no sign of surprise or fear. The muscular man is surprised by her composure. She then asks if, when one connects with the will of the eight heavens, they do not lose consciousness and fall into a vegetative state. The old man appears surprised by her statement. She reveals that the sanguinary group must have provided pills to control this. However, these pills are traps as they can cause veins to pulse until death. He, confused, questions what she is talking about. But she says she knows that Zhongre Muzang, the emperor of the faction, is under the control of these pills and warns that if he continues consuming them, his faction will become puppets of the sanguinary group. The strong man, now downcast, reveals that he had no choice because the clan was on the brink of collapse. She asks if he won't do anything to help his clan, and he says he will send a message to the emperor to assist him with this and thanks the young woman. She says she will pretend that he did not attack her. Now, in another place at night, we see a man entering through a door. He says he wants to ask the owner of the establishment something. Jiyomo asks if any young woman has stayed at the inn. The innkeeper says there are only men there. So our hero asks if there is any vacant room, and the innkeeper offers to show him. He thinks he still hasn't found any clues about Yuren's whereabouts. In his room, he begins to use his aura. He hears cries for help, calling for assistance. At that moment, Jiyomo realizes the cries are coming from the roof. We then see hooded and masked men moving across the rooftop, but the protagonist finds them and orders them to stop. At that moment, a chase begins from rooftop to rooftop. The two men are carrying a large sack and Jiyomo is on their heels. He thinks that today his body feels light. He senses that the wind is guiding him. The men, who appear to have committed a kidnapping, are startled by Jiyomo's presence. With this, our hero tests his powers, releasing a gust of wind. The gust rushes forward, passing close to the man with the sack. He thinks he needs to control his power better. He channels another gust of wind into his arm. He launches it toward the man. This time, he hits his back. Jiyomo feels satisfied for achieving his goal. The criminal falls unconscious. The sack falls to the ground. We then see that inside is the elderly innkeeper. The protagonist rushes toward him. He asks if he is okay, and the old man thanks him. At that moment, one of the kidnappers, irritated, tries to attack our hero with a spear. He aims and throws the spear, but Jiyomo notices the attack and manages to dodge it. The other, who was previously on the ground, gets up. He also attacks him with a sword. At this moment, Jiyomo thinks it's a good opportunity to test his strength. He dodges the attack. The masked man with a top knot tells his adversary that if he doesn't want to get hurt, he should leave. The protagonist smirks sarcastically and says it's nice that they are concerned for him. The man, irritated by this statement, charges our protagonist while the other prepares an attack. He raises his spear and twirls it in the air. The one with the sword warns our hero to prepare for the strike. However, the protagonist readies his power. He channels an abundant amount of energy into his hand. With this, he strikes his attacker. The villain at that moment is stunned, unable to understand what happened, as the power was immense and he is sent flying. Jiyomo realizes he is starting to understand his resonance power better. At that moment, the bald man prepares his strike. He aims with all of his strength at our protagonist, but our hero once again uses his channeling power, hitting the man's stomach, sending him flying. We then see those two men knocked out on the ground. While the hero releases even more of his power and ki, the protagonist looks at them confidently. The men realize they need to run, and one of them wonders how Jiyomo can be so strong. Once they are far away, the protagonist focuses on the injured old man. He asks again if he is alright, and the weakened elder affirms that his abilities are incredible. Our hero says he will take him to the infirmary. However, the old man grabs his arm. He says it is already too late. Jiyomo tells him to hold on, that the infirmary is not far. He introduces himself as Joil, the branch manager of the Howl family in Luoyang. Hearing this, the protagonist is surprised to learn that he is part of the Howl family. The old man, coughing and on the brink of death, asks the protagonist to deliver a token to his daughter, I'm so-so. But Jiyomo urges the old man to hold on a little longer. The elder says he will repay this debt even after death. Our hero calls out to the old man once more. However, seeing the vacant, lifeless eyes, he realizes the man has passed away. Jiyomo gently closes the elder's eyes. He reflects that yet another life has been lost in vain. In the daylight of the same city, we see the protagonist examining what the old man had given him. He wonders what the old man had gotten involved in to be hunted in such a manner. He sees that the paper he was given is a code he doesn't understand. He thinks that, according to the elder's wishes, he must go to the Howl family. At that moment, we see Jiyomo in what appears to be a humble village. He thinks he has found the place. He imagines that this must be a family in crisis. We then see the village of the fallen moon. The protagonist is climbing stairs toward a large house. One of the guards approaches him and asks who he is. Jiyomo says he is there to speak with Joil's daughter. A young woman then appears beside the guard. She asks if he is looking for her. Our hero asks if she is Miss So-so, and she confirms. He hands her the paper and the token the deceased elder had given him. She reads the message. Her eyes begin to fill with tears. She shouts to the guards, ordering them to show respect to our protagonist. All the guards kneel before him. He in turn asks what is going on, clearly confused. Still crying, she thanks him for bringing her father's identification token. Our hero asks her to stand, saying he was only there to fulfill a favor for a deceased father. She asks the name of the man before her, and he replies, Jiyomo. She asks if this great warrior witnessed her father's final moments, and he says yes. Still crying and visibly deeply saddened by the news. We then see Jiyomo inside. At this moment, he is drinking with a young woman. She reveals that through this martial arts competition, her father was monitoring the sanguinary group and their conspiracies. He realizes that it was indeed the work of the sanguinary group. She explains that her father probably anticipated it, as he already had that letter written. Jiyomo asks her why the elder risked his life for this. So-so reveals that he did it for the peace of the martial arts world, and he couldn't refuse because it was a direct request from the Moyang family, who had already been monitoring those groups. Our hero then asks if it was the Moyang family, and So-so confirms, saying that Moyang Suolji had paid a visit. He thinks it must have been the woman he met at the inn. and he asks what she plans to do now. I'm So reveals that she will now fulfill her father's mission and thanks him for delivering the letter to her, to which the man before her responds that she does not need to thank him. Looking at one of her guards, she instructs him to prepare as they will leave immediately. We see a dense forest. Along the road, our hero informs them that he will be taking his leave now. She thanks Jeomho once again, saying that thanks to him, she will be able to accomplish what her father could not, and he wishes her good luck. But at that moment, our hero has a strange feeling and realizes it comes from the wind. Jeomho hears something, and then we see a sword flying in his direction. He manages to dodge it and notices that the sword has a crimson hilt, recognizing it as the Shadow Squadron of the Sanguinary Clan. They are there to abduct I'm So. Jeomho becomes enraged at the sight of those men. The young woman draws her sword and points it at them. She is furious because those men killed her father. She charges toward them, attacking. But at that moment, our protagonist intervenes. He uses his power to repel all those men. He grips his sword tightly, fury and rage flare in his eyes. With incredible speed and skill, he makes several slashes through the air. His strikes shatter the swords of his enemies. He breathes a sigh of relief, then he looks back. He sees that she has been subdued by a man wearing a red hood. Just as the man is about to harm I'm So, we see our hero appear, protecting her with his blade. He forces his sword with all his strength, and with a counterattack, he strikes the man, severing his head. Following this action, several other men in red hoods appear before him. Jeomho asks if I'm So is alright. She responds affirmatively, but says that those men are very strong. He says it's useless because they will only stop when each of their heads is cut off. The woman says they should aim for the head only, and our hero tells her to go and inform the Moyang family of what's happening, because that is the best course of action at the moment. I'm So tries to protest, but the protagonist reminds her that she herself said the most important thing is to maintain peace in the martial arts world. The men are prepared for battle. We then see our hero shouting for her to go quickly. As he prepares for combat, he thinks this is the perfect chance to use his technique, the 10-sword similarity. Activating his ki, we see several swords manifesting in the air. These swords are made of ki. They surround him. He realizes he has finally mastered this skill. He gains momentum and launches them toward his enemies. They in turn begin dodging and fleeing from the weapons. I'm So tries to escape on a horse. However, the one who appears to be the leader orders his subordinates to go after her. Several of them head in her direction, but our hero appears in front of them to block their path. He says they'll have to kill him before they can go after her. At that moment, the leader glares at him with anger. He orders his men to kill him. The protagonist leaps toward his enemies. He feels as if his techniques connect him to his sword. He maneuvers it with precision, following the flow of the wind. With his fluid and rapid movements, he cuts down 2 more of his enemies. More of them appear before him. He slices through them as if they were paper. Our hero is finishing his strike. We see that the strong-looking man is impressed, seeing his subordinates being subdued by a single man. Now our hero stands among the fallen. He looks at the leader with a threatening and defiant expression. The white-haired man thinks the protagonist must be joking. Snapping his fingers, more subordinates appear. They create an illusion of someone flying. Jeomho says that tricks won't work on him, but he is momentarily surprised. He finds himself unable to move. He regrets this. Several of those illusions surround the leader. He charges toward Jeomho. The strong man appears to be using his ability. We see that the protagonist is struck. He is hurled with force and crashes against a tree trunk. The protagonist realizes that this is the dragon spirit's interflux technique, one he has heard of before. Our hero finds himself surrounded by multiple enemies. He remains paralyzed, unable to move. The leader says he will eliminate him. Our hero tries to calm himself, thinking the influx is also just a trick. He wonders if there's any technique his master taught him that could counter this. He begins to meditate. At that moment, the leader of the attackers charges toward him, shouting for him to perish. But our hero grimaces. A gust of wind produced by a blade is seen. The protagonist manages to dodge. He dives to the side, and the man who intended to kill him strikes the tree behind him. Our hero retrieves his sword from the ground. The enemy leader shouts in frustration, but at this moment, Jeomho has already prepared his counterattack. However, the attack is intercepted by the enemy leader. The protagonist, focused on the battle, locks blades with him. The 2 men stare each other down, but our hero puts a bit more force into his skills. He pushes the enemy leader back. The leader is airborne and stunned. At that moment, the man mid-air orders his subordinates to attack. Our hero, preparing his strikes once more, thinks that he will not fall for the same trick twice. He cuts down each of the men before him, beheading them. But behind them, we see 4 more silhouettes approaching. Jeomho shouts. Turning around, we see him delivering several slashes with his blade. The blade becomes soaked with the blood of his enemies. With this opening, the leader of those men charges once again at our protagonist. He tries to strike from behind, but something happens. We see a blade dripping with blood. The man is confused. He was just about to use his attack. Jeomho wonders what happened. We see the large man kneeling. Behind him is So on horseback. So appears exhausted. Our hero calls her name, surprised, and we see that she was the one responsible for delivering the fatal blow to the man. The hooded men begin to vanish. Jeomho sheaths his sword, relieved. She rides toward him, calling his name. He asks if she found the documents, and she confirms, showing them to him. With tears in her eyes, she says that thanks to him, she was able to complete her father's final mission. Our hero, with a serious but happy expression, says there is no need to thank him and asks her to be careful. She bows and says she will be eternally grateful to him. Jiyeomho, returning the bow, asks her to take care. He then turns and continues his journey. It is now night. In the garden of the Moyang family, we see two people talking. I'm Surso indicates that she is present. She shows the records to the woman from before. The woman tells her she did a good job. She hands her a red pouch. The woman standing before her asks what it is. The woman with the diadem on her forehead says it is Jolil's reward. She reveals that he protected the peace of the martial world, so if his sacrifice was honored. Soso reveals that, in truth, there is someone else who should receive that prize, and she mentions our protagonist's name. The woman with the diadem on her forehead thinks it must be the young man she met at the inn. Soso continues, saying that he defeated all the enemies at once using his martial skills. The woman is surprised that he managed to accomplish such a feat. In a dense forest, our hero advances on his journey through the forest and thinks that the appearance of the Shadow Dragon assassins shows that the sanguinary group is planning something and he needs to find Yuren soon. At that moment, he has another premonition. He wonders what this feeling is. We then see someone with long hair approaching. The figure lands on the ground, revealing their long white hair. The man says that Jiyeomho is indeed very skilled. He further reveals that he is not surprised that the Shadow Dragon squadron was defeated by him. Jiyeomho then asks the white-haired man if he is part of the sanguinary group. The man reveals that because of what Jiyeomho did, he had to come personally. The protagonist asks for his name. However, the white-haired man says that for someone about to perish, he is quite curious. He then introduces himself as by howl. He releases his aura and abilities toward our protagonist. Our hero prepares for battle. He leaps and dodges the white-haired man's attacks. To prepare his counterattack, he draws his sword. He charges toward the man. Using the power of his sword, he launches an aura attack. However, the white-haired man deflects it with his hand. The impact of the deflected aura hits the ground behind him, exploding the area. Jiyeomho lands in front of the man. He thinks that the man is as strong as he had imagined. At that moment, the white-haired man charges toward our hero. They stare at each other for a moment. Jiyeomho then uses his 10 swords technique. The swords advance toward the man. The man, in turn, deflects them using only his martial arts. Jiyeomho realizes the extent of his skill. With his eyes glowing and a grim expression, he thrusts his sword toward his attacker's face. The man is startled. He retreats to avoid the blow. The white-haired man lands. His attacker tells him that he is skilled enough to dodge his attacks, which is impressive, and asks where he is from. Jiyeomho thinks and realizes they don't know he is from the Great Master's castle, so he says he is just the head of a small family. His attacker becomes irritated, feeling as though he is going through all this trouble just to kill the head of a small family. He leaps and charges toward our hero, launching multiple attacks. Our protagonist thinks that this man is very strong and that he won't be able to defeat him alone with his current skills. He plans to buy time until he can use his 10 swords technique again, channeling the power of lightning into his sword. The man shouts that this attack is ridiculous, but Jiyeomho remains focused on his strike. His sword meets the hand of the white-haired man. The clash disperses the surrounding environment with the power of the attack. The man steps back, surprised. Taking advantage of the opening, our hero readies his sword and slashes at his shoulder. The adversary screams, calling him a scoundrel. He tries to punch him, but Jiyeomho is already prepared and launches another attack. At that moment, a man appears between the two. Jiyeomho looks at a man with a mustache and dark clothing. He realizes that the man blocked the attack from the white-haired man using the power of his sword. The man tells him to be cautious. The white-haired man apologizes. The man with the mustache continues, saying that now is not the time for games, and the long-haired man kneels. The protagonist thinks that this man is also part of the sanguinary group. Now looking at our hero, the mustached man orders them to leave. The man with the mustache leaps into the air and the protagonist shouts for them to stop. However, the long-haired man looks at Jiyeomho and says that the next time they meet, he will kill him. And with that, he vanishes from his sight. Our hero thinks that this situation is terrible because he had the perfect chance to kill that man. Sheathing his sword, he reflects on how they disappeared, confirming that the sanguinary group is planning something. At the temple of the competition, where the battles will take place, Jiyeomho hasn't forgotten his mission to find Yuren. He continues to think that he doesn't know what the sanguinary group is planning, but completing his mission as quickly as possible will help him. Jiyeomho looks through the crowd, feeling anxious. He spots a man. He realizes that it will be problematic if those guards see him. Jiyeomho tries to hide among the crowd. He observes the Archduke and his soldiers searching for information, and notices that they also seem to have not found Yuren. Trying to avoid any commotion, he decides to use a tracking spell. Jiyeomho makes a seal with his hands while applying clairvoyance around him. A thread emerges from the protagonist's clothing. It goes towards the Archduke's clothing, entering from behind his cape. The protagonist says that this way he will know where Jaehyun is at any moment. Jiyeomho blends into the crowd. In another location, someone is playing a type of drum. We can see a crowd cheering as they watch the championship. A man in red welcomes everyone to the martial arts championship, saying that they should all eagerly await a great spectacle. The crowd cheers at the man's words. The former commander judges that based on the fourth princess's personality, she was probably at the front. The man announces that they will start the first battle and that the first contestant is from a Murim family, Hayag Ryan Puan. After the announcement, the challenger begins to walk through the arena. He announces that his rival will be a man shrouded in mystery, eager to win the competition. The young master of fusion, Bak Yuchen, Ryan Puan, glares at him irritated. He reciprocates the look towards his rival. The referee raises his finger and announces that the competition will begin. We can see the fourth princess happy that it is finally starting. The man next to her says that Ryan Puan is his grandson. The fourth princess says he must be a great-grandson. Smiling, the man confirms what she said. Ryan Puan tells his opponent that he will let him attack first. Bak Yuchen says he won't refuse. He charges forward, holding his sword. The first challenger jumps back, dodging his attack. Mocking his rival, he asks if that's all he has, and it seems everything will end quickly. Suddenly, he charges forward. Swinging his sword, he unleashes a powerful attack called the Disastrous Swordsman. Bak Yuchen looks at him with determination. He attacks again, but his opponent also strikes at the same time. Jiaomo thinks that this is a true swordsman, using his sword as he pleases. Ryan Puan narrowly dodges his opponent's attack. He steps back to gain some distance. Looking at his rival, he acknowledges his skill with the sword. But Bak Yuchen says that the first challenger is setting him free. Suddenly, while shouting, the first challenger leaps, saying that no matter what, he is no match for a true swordsman. The boy shouts that this is the Fortune Dragon's sword art. They clash swords, with Bak Yuchen kneeling to withstand the impact. He continues defending against the other competitors' attacks with great difficulty. The man delivering the blows keeps going relentlessly. They continue exchanging blows while moving across the arena. The second challenger, clearly exhausted, looks at his rival. He crouches down, attempting to strike his opponent's legs. The man who had been attacking up until now is startled by this move. He distances himself from his rival once again. But now his opponent starts attacking him relentlessly, reversing the fight. At this moment, the one who was cornered and defending is the first challenger. Confused, he notices that his rival is copying his techniques. The second challenger jumps towards him. He shouts as he prepares to strike. Suddenly, his eyes glow white and he looks shocked and horrified. He falls to his knees on the ground, clutching his head. The fourth princess, watching the fight, is surprised and wonders what happened. Looking at the young man, she questions what could have happened to his head. But before he can recover, Ryan Puan attacks him. He counterattacks, trying to land a blow. But again, his eyes glow white. He stops the attack and grabs his head. The fourth princess thinks these movements are very strange. Suddenly, the man next to her murmurs something. Her attention is drawn to the man who is making a seal with his hands. She pulls on his clothes. Extremely irritated, the fourth princess asks if the old man is interfering with the fight. Angrily, she says the old man is ruining her family's reputation. The old man nervously asks what she's talking about. A crowd of people gathers around them, as the fourth princess accuses the old man of cheating. The old man, trying to get out of the situation, asks why she's making up lies. Thanks to all the commotion caused by the fourth princess, Jiaomo finally manages to find her. Relieved, he thinks that he found her, but due to her being dressed as a man, it was very difficult for him. A little later, with the competition fight interrupted, someone is greeting Yuren. The man in red thanks the fourth princess for finding the cheater. She says she just did what was necessary. The man politely asks for her name. A little nervous, she gives a false name to the man while saying she is leaving. She leaves the place she was and heads towards the street. But suddenly, the former commander calls her, leaving her surprised. Nervous and embarrassed, she calls him by his name. Politely, he says they should return together. She asks how Jiaomo recognized her even though Jiahin himself did not. He says that with a personality as unique as hers, it would be impossible not to recognize. The princess asks what he will do now that he has found her. He responds that, as she might suspect, they must return to the Grand Master's castle and notify the Archduke. She begs him not to do so since the martial arts competition has barely started. He informs her that there are people from the bloodthirsty group there and that it would be dangerous. Yuren asks if that is true and if it wouldn't mean they are working on something. This leaves Jiaomo a little confused. Elsewhere, the white-haired warrior is talking to a man. This man is the first lieutenant of the Shadow Dragon's troop, informing him about his discovery regarding who was behind the Hao family. Bai Howl, surprised and curious, asks who this person might be. The man says it is the Moyang family and that they apparently are after their plans. The white-haired, excited, asks if they shouldn't catch them before anything goes wrong. The lieutenant, understanding his superior's intentions, asks if he should prepare. Stretching carelessly, the man looks at his subordinate and says they will go tonight. Night finally falls. Dozens of men from the bloodthirsty group are running through the forest. Reaching the Moyang family residence, the men position themselves on the rooftops. The white-haired, who was leading the men, notices the residence and sees a shadow at the window. It was Moyang's COG, who was writing a letter about the Spear Dragon competition conspiracy. She suggests that to prevent anything from happening, it would be ideal for everyone to gather and discuss the matter. But suddenly, Bai Hewol jumps in front of her. Confident, he begins to smile. But suddenly, a sort of dagger flies in his direction. He senses the object approaching. Bai Hewol ducks and dodges while looking back, searching for who threw it. It was an old man who asks who that man is and how he dared to enter the Moyang family's territory. Confused, Seoja comes out and asks what is happening. The old man informs her that there are intruders and that she must alert the White Sword troops as quickly as possible. She grabs a kind of whistle and puts it in her mouth. The old man advances to attack the white-haired intruder, saying he will kill him. Bai Hewol laughs, saying that he is the one who should be saying something like that. The old man becomes even more irritated. He throws several blades towards the intruder, who easily defends them with his hands. While the white-haired defends himself from the old man's attacks, Bai Hewol claims that none of these attacks work against him. But then Seoji appears surrounded by several soldiers. In response, the lieutenant positions himself with his men. Annoyed, the lieutenant orders his men to capture the woman. She begins to prepare for battle, removing her belt. Seoji positions herself as if the belt were a whip. At that moment, the bloodthirsty group leaps towards them, and thus begins the battle with the Moyang soldiers. One of the bloodthirsty group men tries to attack the woman who positions herself with her belt. Suddenly, she delivers a blow towards the man, who, with no chance of defense, ends up dead. The lieutenant says that, as expected, she is no ordinary person. He runs towards her, attempting to attack her. She promptly counterattacks, anticipating his move. However, the man manages to dodge all of her attacks. Seoji is surprised and clearly exhausted. With a smile on his face, he brandishes his sword, managing to wrap her whip around his sword, leaving her surprised by his feat. He feels confident with what he has just done, crouching and pulling Seoji along with her whip. We see a frenzied sequence of attacks. It was the fight between the lord of the Moyang family and the white-haired intruder. Smiling, he says that even though the Moyang reputation isn't the best, they truly are not so bad at martial arts. The old man becomes even more irritated, asking what he is talking about. The old man advances again against the intruder. Bai Hewol prepares to strike him. He extends his arm, attempting to land a punch on the old man, which leaves him completely surprised. The punch hits him squarely, lifting him up. The old man is thrown far away, but suddenly, somehow, the force seems to have doubled, and it starts to throw him even farther and faster. Seoji sees the old man pass by her and calls him Noya. The lieutenant, irritated, says that she is not in a position to worry about others. He begins to emit a red aura while holding his sword with the belt wrapped around it. Suddenly, the belt explodes. Losing her balance, Seoji asks how this is possible. The lieutenant tries to stab her with his sword. With great effort, the woman manages to dodge her opponent's sword. With a crazed look, the man says he tried to be gentle, but she is making him angry. He positions himself again to attempt another attack on her. Using what's left of her whip, she manages to stop his attack. Below the force of the impact, the belt causes friction on her hand, making her start to bleed. The warrior of the Moyang family was clearly exhausted and in pain. Applying even more force, the lieutenant says that she won't be able to stop his sword for long. He pushes harder, even shouting as he searches for strength to break the whip. After that, the belt finally breaks. She closes her eyes, accepting her fate. But suddenly, a blade interrupts the lieutenant's attack, and that blade belongs to Jomo. She looks up, incredulous that he is there. The lieutenant, confused, asks who this guy is. Looking at him, the protagonist says he is there to do business with the Moyang family and did not expect such hostility. Suddenly, the leader of the bloodthirsty group lands in front of the lieutenant. He stares at the former commander while the old man's body lies on the ground. Not much different from him. Countless soldiers of the Moyang family lie lifeless on the ground. The man says they have met again sooner than expected and that his opponent is seeking his own death. Extremely irritated, the white-haired man gives the order to kill Giomo. All the soldiers of the bloodthirsty group charge towards the man to attack him. One of them tries to make the first strike, but only the movement of the former commander's blade can be seen. The soldier cannot even comprehend what cut him as his head is severed from his body. Giomo looks at the men as a lightning bolt comes from his eye, and he begins to brandish his sword as if creating multiple others. They go towards the soldiers. They don't even have a chance to defend themselves, and in the blink of an eye, all of them are dead. The former commander thinks these must be the effects of his daily training. Terrified by Hewol questions what those movements were and how they resembled those of a monster. The lieutenant leaps towards the mysterious hero, saying he will not stand idle. He prepares to deliver a downward strike. The mysterious hero simply looks at him. He effortlessly defends the lieutenant's attack. The man is shocked at how easily Giomo blocked his attack. The hero begins to unleash a sequence of strikes against him. Astonished by such strength, with great difficulty, he starts to dodge the attacks. But even with all his effort, some of the attacks still hit him, making the lieutenant even more shocked and afraid. The man looks at the lieutenant, irritated by his audacity. He throws several blades towards his enemy while gaining some distance. The lieutenant, startled, prepares to defend the attack, managing to deflect some. As the lieutenant is still recovering after blocking the attack, Giomo wonders if he really managed to defend against it. But then the lieutenant is caught off guard as the blades he just defended against begin to return. They strike him from behind, and unable to block them, he ends up being hit by several. The man can only scream in pain. The white-haired man mentally affirms that his lieutenant is no match for the mysterious hero. Suddenly, an attack comes from behind Giomo. He senses the attack and looks back. With a quick movement, he manages to defend against the attack. Behind him, a massive explosion occurs due to the impact. With sarcasm, the former commander says it's quite suspicious that they are chasing a woman like true dogs. As he positions himself to launch another attack, the white-haired man says it's none of his business. Suddenly, the man shouts, "Demonic blood flow." With that, 2 wind vortexes are launched in front of him. They head at full force towards Jiyomo. With a stern look, he says they are impressive tricks. But with relative ease, he cuts through the wind. They split, causing explosions around him from the impact. Howl curses him as he charges towards him. Pointing his sword at his enemy, the former commander says he should not be called his opponent. The enraged man prepares another strike and launches it towards the hero. Jiyomo charges towards his enemy, slicing his attack in half once again, causing explosions. He unleashes a sequence of attacks on his enemy, who only defends himself. He tries to stab his enemy. His opponent is surprised by the movement, but he cannot defend in time and ends up with a scratch on his face. He panics when he sees his face bleeding. Pointing his sword at Howl, the former commander asks what he will do now that his face is scratched. As he prepares to launch the same vortex attack, the man asks who Jiyomo really is to have improved his skills so much in such a short time. He unleashes a barrage of attacks, but as expected, the former commander also counterattacks. He continues to fend off his enemy's attacks while trying to get closer to him. When he finally gets close enough, the hero simply looks at his enemy and smiles. Again, he launches a series of attacks, and this time, with no room to defend, the white-haired man ends up taking all of them. Using his last strength, the man turns to Jiyomo and curses him again. Preparing to deliver the final blow, the former commander tells him to stop talking nonsense as now is the time for his death. But surprisingly, the lieutenant steps in front of his attack. He yells for all his men to protect the captain. Without showing any discomfort or surprise, the hero just looks at the man. He strikes 2 blows, each cutting off one of the man's arms. The man screams in pain as he falls to the ground. When the former commander looks up, 3 soldiers are already trying to attack him. Seeing this, he realizes that no matter how many he kills, there always seem to be more. He begins to brandish his sword. By the end of his attack, all of his opponents are lying on the ground. He quickly approaches their captain. He delivers a blow with all his rage and fury, but somehow, he does not cut the captain. Instead, he hits one of the soldiers. He notices that Howl is using his own subordinates as shields. Right behind him, the captain is desperately trying to flee. The captain looks back to make sure the former commander is not following him. Jiyomo concludes that cleaning up this mess is more important than pursuing the captain at this moment. Approaching Seojae, he asks if she's okay. With tears in her eyes, she says the name of the lord of her family. Meanwhile, in another location, a candle illuminates the inside of a house. Jiyomo, along with Seojae and the old man, are inside a room. The former commander has his hand over the old man's chest while emitting an aura. He breathes heavily as he concentrates. After accomplishing what he intended, he removes his hand, still surrounded by an aura. He informs them that the old man will wake up soon and Seal thanks him. She asks if he is part of the Grand Master's castle. Without directly answering, he asks how she figured that out. She says that the Moyang family's ability to gather information is exceptional and asks how he found that place. Jiyomo explains that the 4th princess sent him there to discover the bloodthirsty group's plans. She praises his skills and says they need the help of the Grand Master's castle. Someone is leaping from rooftop to rooftop, moving as fast as possible to reach a destination. It was the former commander himself, determined to inform Yuran as quickly as possible about the bloodthirsty group's plans. He remembers that Seal informed him that the bloodthirsty group's plan is to start a war against the Grand Master's castle by kidnapping promising young members from other families so they cannot oppose the group. He confesses that even if he doesn't want to, he will have to engage in this conflict to prevent it from escalating into a civil war. He quickly lands in a courtyard. Entering the room, the former commander searches for the 4th princess. Realizing that no one is there, he feels a bit nervous, wondering where she could have gone, saying that this is urgent. Satisfied, he admits it was a good idea to have used clairvoyance on her. Jiyomo notices her presence is nearby. In the city at night, the princess is protecting a child behind her. A man with a knife in hand, along with 2 companions, tells the 4th princess that if she doesn't want to get hurt, he recommends she leave as quickly as possible. She curses them, saying that they made this child into a thief. Attempting to attack her, the man tells her not to regret what she said. He strikes at her, but the 4th princess simply ducks. The man is surprised as he did not expect Yuran to dodge. She stands up and hits him. The man flies backward, bleeding heavily from his mouth. He crashes into the wall with great force, creating a hole as he drops his knife. The man's companion attacks her, asking if she knows who they are. The princess easily dodges the attack again. She says she knows who they are as she strikes a blow to his shoulder. The man screams in pain as his shoulder twists and he can barely move his hand. The 3rd companion tells her not to move, which surprises Yuran. The man with a blade to the boy's neck says that if she moves, he will kill him. Annoyed, she calls them human scum. While making a hand seal, the 4th princess admits that it wouldn't be hard to kill them, but it's too risky with a child who could get hurt. The man mocks her, telling her to just obey. Suddenly, something moves like the wind. When the man finally realizes what happened, his head is already severed. It was the former commander, who angrily says that once again the princess is involved in controversial matters. A bit tired from the fight, the 4th princess says that these people were the ones who started it. The man she had thrown against the wall takes advantage of her distraction to try attacking her again. But once more, Yuran dodges effortlessly. However, Jiyomo then charges at the man. He pierces him with his sword. The man doesn't understand how this person managed to move so quickly. Still filled with fear, the thief begins to cough up blood. He falls to the ground lifeless. Jiao looks at the princess and tells her to never hesitate to dirty her sword. A bit embarrassed, she says that's not the problem. She admits to herself that her biggest fear was the child getting hurt. The child was crying, scared and frightened by everything that had happened. Yurin says she will take him to the Grand Master's castle so he can be safe. Looking at her, extremely serious, the former commander says he has something to tell her. Confused by what he is saying, Yurin looks at him. Meanwhile, at the Bloodthirsty Group's headquarters, the white-haired man is being slapped. An older-looking man slaps him and stares at him. Extremely irritated, the Celestial Master's son, now named Talmuk, says that Bai Hewell led the Shadow Dragon group into danger and came back alone. With his head slightly lowered, the white-haired man informs him that a mysterious man appeared suddenly. Talmuk slaps him again. Angry at the boy's excuses, he calls him incompetent. As the Celestial Master's son glares at the boy, he lowers his head, saying he will kill that man. The man remains irritated, but a hand reaches out to him. It was a woman asking the man to give the boy another chance. Looking at Bai Hewell, she asks if he wouldn't kill himself if he failed again. Looking at the boy, Talmuk says that this time he must go with Yul Gunchuk. The boy bows, thanking her for the second chance. Angrily, Bai Hewell looks at the woman, thinking she's truly succeeding in manipulating Talmuk. Meanwhile, in another place, a group of people is seated around a table. Suddenly, two people enter through the door. It was the Archduke of the Grand Master's castle along with his sister. Xiujia introduces herself as a member of the Moyang family and says she has been expecting them. The Archduke Jaehyun also introduces himself and says he is interested in the conspiracy involving the martial arts competition and the Bloodthirsty group. She says the conspiracy is real. Jaehyun gets angry, cursing the Bloodthirsty group. Seal invites everyone to take a seat first. After everyone regains their composure and sits at the table, she says that to prevent the Bloodthirsty group from causing more problems, it must unite and stop them. The young master of the Jaegel family says that he has also been keeping an eye on the Bloodthirsty group recently. The deputy from the Pang family says she doesn't understand why the Bloodthirsty group is acting now. The Archduke concludes that they probably don't know that the Grand Master's castle has stolen a secret book from the Bloodthirsty group. The young master of the Huangbo family says he has also thought about this and that perhaps they are worrying unnecessarily. The representative of the Pang family says that if they really managed to kidnap many people, they wouldn't have anywhere to hide them. A member of the Nangong family says they should not underestimate the influence of the Bloodthirsty group. Extremely irritated, the representative of the Huangbo family says that doesn't make any sense. But suddenly, a man is thrown into the room. The one who had thrown the soldier was Jiao. All the representatives stand and draw their swords. Xiujia says that this man is on their side. She says that, as expected, the Bloodthirsty group is following them. He informs them that he killed everyone except the person leading them. Yurin, who was accompanying her brother, asks where the man had been following them from. The former commander informs her that apparently they were hiding within the Pang family's convoy. The representative of the Pang family, frightened and nervous, begins to deny his accusations. Looking at the man on the ground, he merely states that it isn't important at the moment. Jiao grabs the man on the ground, staring at him. Suddenly, he delivers several quick blows to the man's body. He demands the man tell him everything he knows. The man bites down on something in his mouth. Jiao, surprised by the man's action, realizes it might be a poison pill. He grabs the man's throat, making him spit out the pill. Looking at the man, the former commander says he won't let him die easily and will make him reveal where their hideout is. The man begs him to kill him. As he prepares to strike the man again, he remarks that he suspected it wouldn't be so easy. Jiao begins to deliver a series of blows to the man's body once again. Even with numerous bruises, the man still says he won't reveal anything easily. The former commander realizes something that leaves him shocked. He turns, telling everyone to evacuate the area as quickly as possible, while the man behind him begins to swell. He leaps, trying to escape the explosion caused by the man. The princess, surprised, tries to shield herself from the explosion. Jiao runs desperately. He grabs her, trying to protect her. Fragments of the man fly in all directions. He places his hand on the hilt of his weapon. Drawing it, he destroys all the fragments heading their way. He admits to the princess that he had no idea the man could explode. Embarrassed, the princess pulls away from him. After the incident, they approach the site of the explosion. The Archduke, outraged, says that Jiao was a horrible person, but the representative of the Nambang family says this is not the best time for them to argue. The young master of the Damok family agrees and asks if the Moyang family has anything in mind. Xiujia suggests that the best option would be to cancel the martial arts competition, but Javel Haiyan says the students will likely not allow such a thing. Hesitantly, she says that if this happens, the Archduke encourages her, saying she doesn't need to hesitate to say it. Determined, Moyang says that in that case, it must create panic among the public before the Bloodthirsty group does, thus disrupting the martial arts competition. They are surprised by Moyang's plan. The representative of the Javel family agrees that it would be very effective but also extremely dangerous. Nangdong Yusong says they could even be expelled. She states that they will have to use another method based on the demonic soul vigil. The young master of the Nambang family asks if it really would be the demonic soul vigil. A member of the Dongbang family explains that the vigil is a bell that always rings when an evil energy approaches. Jagal Haiyan agrees that this would be the best option at the moment. Dongbang Seong announces that the competition will begin tomorrow. They all look in one direction, determined. In the city, as many people walk around and shop, Jaehyun, along with the princess and Jeomho, walks through the streets. He tells the fourth princess that she must return tomorrow as quickly as possible, which doesn't make her very happy. And he instructs the former commander to accompany her to the Grand Master's castle as quickly as possible tomorrow. Yurin tells her brother to stop treating her like a child. He holds her shoulders, saying that he is not treating her like a child, but that he fears something might happen to her. Looking away, the princess says she has things to resolve and that she won't be able to leave tomorrow. Suspicious, he asks what those things are that she needs to resolve. She says she has a child she wants to take with her to the Grand Master's castle and that she will take the child's family as well. He breathes a sigh of relief, saying that's fine. She asks if Jeomho will go with her, to which he simply nods affirmatively. She looks at him and ends up smiling. The next day, the crowd goes wild with the fights. They shout the names of the competitors, cheering for them. One of the spectators says that Seom Sarin will win, and another calls it absurd. While everyone is excited about the fights, the representative of the Jaegil family walks through the crowd anxiously and meets another representative. It was Hwangbo Jongwoo. All the representatives were there, including Hajeon, the deputy representative of the Pang family. Suddenly, a bell rings. The fight is so intense that no one notices. One of the competitors continues striking his rival. Unlike him, his opponent remains extremely calm. Suddenly, when one of the competitors strikes his opponent, he elegantly defends. Then he immediately prepares to counterattack. He unleashes a sequence of blows, forcing his opponent onto the defensive. While everyone fervently cheers for the fight, the Archduke stands among the crowd, merely observing his surroundings. The bell rings again. He wonders if it is reacting to the evil energy, but in any case, there are too many people around to identify it. Unexpectedly, a massive explosion occurs in the arena, causing the platform to tremble. This leaves everyone extremely shocked and silences all the cheers. Jaehyun turns around, extremely surprised and nervous, wondering what is happening. Another large explosion rocks the arena, this time powerful enough to completely destroy it. Everyone begins to run frantically, trying to escape the arena. The representative of the Jaegil family wonders what is happening. The Archduke questions if this explosion was the work of the Moyeon family. But another explosion happens again, this time at the exit of the stage. A person in the crowd begins removing their clothing, revealing that they are actually from the bloodthirsty group. When people finally realize what's happening, they notice he's not alone. Dozens of soldiers begin leaping among the crowd. They land on the walls, as people start asking if this is the bloodthirsty group. One of the men in the crowd questions whether the soldiers think everything will be fine after what they have done. But suddenly, someone emerges from the rubble. Landing gracefully is an older man who, with only one leg, manages to balance on a piece of broken wood. With black eyes, the man warns that if they don't shut up, he will throw a bomb at them all. Jaehyun is confused, wondering what is happening. The young master Dongbang Seong, surprised, says he didn't suspect the bloodthirsty group would take the crowd hostage. Damak Gyuwon notes that they are always one step ahead. The man introduces himself as Jin Yobang, the second blood spirit of the bloodthirsty group, and declares that if any young masters wish to save lives, they must follow them. Some nobles begin to ask where they would have to go, nervous about what might happen. The Archduke telepathically orders his soldiers to go to his sister. They confirm his order telepathically. He instructs them to hurry and inform the Grand Master's castle branch about the current danger. They accept his command and begin to use a technique to move stealthily. Irritated, the man asks if no one will volunteer and warns that if he calls again and no one comes, they will start killing people one by one. This causes all the residents and civilians to become nervous and fearful. The blood spirit begins calling out the name of the Jaegil family representative, shouting boldly. One of the bloodthirsty group's men lands in the middle of the crowd. He grabs a man by his clothes while holding his sword in the other hand. The man begs the young master to go with the bloodthirsty group. Suddenly, Jin Yobang begins counting down from 3 to 1. But the young master of the Jaegil family steps forward from the crowd, saying there's no need to continue. With a determined look, he says he will accompany them. With him, all the other representatives of noble families appear. The man smiles and says they should have done this sooner. In another part of the city, the princess, along with Jeomho and the child, are heading to his home. The boy says they've arrived at the place. He runs towards the door, calling out for his mother. The worried mother asks where he has been as she coughs heavily, clearly unwell. The boy excitedly tells his mother that they won't have to live in that place anymore, while she looks confused at the presence of strangers in her home. Concerned, Yurin thinks the woman might collapse at any moment. Suddenly, something catches her attention. She goes to the boy's mother, saying she brought dumplings for her. The mother asks who this woman is and why she's giving them such good food. The princess explains that Jaeong stole her wallet. The mother looks confused and nervous at what the woman just told her, and the boy becomes afraid of his mother's reaction. As the boy's mother scolds him, the former commander watches them from a distance. Suddenly, he senses something approaching. He places his hand on his sword, unaware that the person behind him is one of the guards the Archduke had ordered to go to them. Jeomho places his sword at the guard's neck, asking who he is, leaving the guard surprised that he could sense his presence. A little nervous about the situation, the man says he was sent by the Archduke and that at this very moment, the bloodthirsty group has taken over the competition hall. The princess turns, asking if her brother is okay. Several carriages sent by the bloodthirsty group members arrive while the young masters await orders. The blood spirit commands everyone to hurry and get into the carriages. Several darts are inserted into the hands of the young masters. They are also forced to drink a type of potion. The young master of the Hwangbo family asks what they are being forced to drink. With a punitive look, the blood spirit says it would be better for them to quietly comply if they don't want the civilians to suffer, as a convoy of carriages takes the young masters out of the city. The members of the bloodthirsty group look around, ensuring that nothing goes off plan. The Archduke, disguised among the members of the bloodthirsty group, wonders where they are going and how long he can remain hidden. Inside one of the carriages, all the young masters are together. Huang Mojangwu asks if any of them have an idea of what they were forced to drink. Jaegil Haiyan suspects that it might be mountain poison. The young master of the Nambang family complains that he no longer feels energy in his body. Meanwhile, the representative of the Damuk family says they are draining their energy and turning them into puppets. Jaegil Haiyan tells everyone to calm down and try to gather as much internal energy as they can. He tries his best, straining himself and clearly feeling pain and discomfort. All of them, extremely exhausted, eventually give up. They finally arrive at the bloodthirsty group's hideout. The Archduke grows nervous as they arrive. As the convoy continues, shadows can be seen trailing behind them. It was the protagonist along with the fourth princess. She, surprised as she never imagined there would be a bloodthirsty group branch in Luoyang. The former commander states that not everything is as it seems. Furious, the princess asks how Jiomho knew her brother's location in real time. He informs her that he placed a tracking spell on Jahian some time ago. Finding this suspicious, the princess asks if he placed one on her as well. The protagonist simply ignores her while leading dozens of soldiers into battle. He says that he'll talk about it later, but for now, the priority is to rescue all the young masters. After his signal, all the soldiers begin scaling the wall of the bloodthirsty group, invading the hideout. Inside the hideout in the central courtyard, the carriages stop and the soldiers begin unloading materials. The blood spirit orders everyone to work as quickly as possible and move the cargo. While carrying a sack of supplies, Jahian thinks this must be a food cart and wonders how he can alert the others. Suddenly, everyone is caught off guard by a massive explosion. They begin to fall uncontrollably. The bloodthirsty group members start shouting that there are intruders among them. Lying on the ground, the Archduke wonders what just happened. Surprisingly, the former commander speeds past the Archduke like lightning, heading straight for his enemies. He is shocked by Jiomho's speed and decisive action. In the blink of an eye, a member of the bloodthirsty group is already split in half. As the protagonist surveys his surroundings, a battalion of soldiers leaps into combat against the bloodthirsty group members. He turns to the Archduke, who is still on the ground, and orders him to get up and help. The princess rushes to her brother, asking if he's okay. Surprised, he asks what she is doing there. She says that he'll talk about it later and that they need to buy time until Miss Moyan gathers all the faction troops. A member of the bloodthirsty group tries to attack her from behind, but the princess, extremely irritated, turns around. With a single strike, she severs the man's head from his body. As he draws his sword, the Archduke asks if he should start warming up. The young master Jaegil Haiyan asks the others what's happening outside, when suddenly the protagonist opens the door, startling them. He says he's there to save them and that they must go. The former commander cuts the bindings on the young master's hands. The representative of the Jaegil family thanks him for the assistance. They all exit the carriages and grab weapons from the fallen soldiers. The blood spirit admits he did not expect their location to be exposed. Annoyed, he says he no longer needs the hostages and that they should just kill everyone. The soldiers agree with the orders and leap into battle. They move toward the representatives of the families to attack them. But Jaegil Haiyan blocks the first attack with his sword. As the impact is too strong, he ends up falling to the ground. Jahian orders his sister to protect them since they have been poisoned with the mountain poison. Following her brother's order, she charges ahead. Preparing to launch an attack, she defeats all three warriors who went after the young ones. The Archduke is surprised by his sister's strength and wonders when she became so powerful. She looks at her brother and asks if he's not going to fight. That's when Jahian snaps back to reality and notices two warriors coming to attack him. He quickly takes an attack stance. He delivers a blow that completely cuts one of his assailants. The other warrior tries to attack him from behind with full force, but Jahian dodges. He observes the movement of the man attacking him, countering the strike that cuts him in half. The Archduke is startled when a blade passes close to his face. He manages to defend himself but receives a very strong impact. When he finally stops, he observes who has come to challenge him. Nervously, he wonders what this monstrous pressure he's feeling is. The protagonist looks in the direction of the fight, realizing that it's the same man who interrupted his fight with the white-haired one, an old man with a black cloak and black hair. At that moment, Jiomho shouts for the Archduke to be careful, as this man is a master. Confident, Jahian takes a battle stance, saying that it's impossible. The man smiles, asking if he's afraid. It was Yul Gunchuk, the leader of the Black Mask Squad. With a determined look, the Archduke says there's no way he is afraid. A bloody battle continues on the battlefield, with many soldiers from both the Grand Master's castle and the bloodthirsty group dead. The princess notices that no matter how many they kill, more keep appearing as if there's no end. As he cuts down various enemies, the protagonist thinks that the bloodthirsty group truly has far more warriors than expected. This excites him, making him think that now he can test his new abilities as he casts a spell. He unleashes a spell called Motion of Five Similarities, a powerful spell that destroys everything in front of him. The attack travels a long distance, cutting down many of the bloodthirsty group warriors who don't even understand what happened. Shouting with a mix of excitement and rage, the blood spirit says that the boy is far too wild for his taste. He launches a long-range attack at him. The former commander manages to dodge, but the spot where he stood explodes completely. He begins to reflect on his last attack and notices that it is a very suitable technique for aggressive burst attacks. The blood spirit leaps toward Jiomho, calling him arrogant. He sees the strong member of the bloodthirsty group coming at him. They start exchanging deadly blows without stopping. Both strike and block each other's attacks. The man, in extreme anger, says that if he dies, he will take Jiomho with him. With that, his sword begins to be engulfed in flames. He resumes attacking, trying to close the distance between them. The former commander dodges all the blows with relative ease, but he notices that he's being cornered against the wall. The man yells that this will be the end as he strikes. The protagonist looks at his opponent while his eyes glow, lightning flashing from them. Suddenly, their swords clash, causing a massive explosion where they are, sending fragments flying across the courtyard. The blood spirit is surprised that his blade was stopped, and even more so that his sword is now cracked. They both take distance from each other. Yul Gunchuk is completely exhausted and also has some wounds. The protagonist calmly looks at his cloak, which is on fire. Indifferently, he extinguishes the flames with his bare hand. As he removes his cloak, he asks if that's all the blood spirit has and says it's now his turn. The former commander charges at his opponent, preparing to strike. With just one movement, he unleashes multiple attacks, forcing the blood spirit to stay on the defensive. He determinedly continues attacking without stopping for even a moment. Yul Gunchuk, with a mix of nervousness and excitement, just watches his opponent. Suddenly, something comes toward the former commander. It leaves him surprised and confused by what's approaching. He defends himself with great effort, even surprising the blood spirit. Jiomho is knocked far away. He uses his legs and sword to brace himself against the ground, spitting a little blood to the side as he looks at his new opponent. It's revealed to be the white-haired man greeting his old friend. The protagonist is surprised, asking if it's really him. The former commander recalls the face of Bai Howl. Looking at him again, his face bears a large scar and he is visibly much older. Surprised and shocked by what he's seeing, Jiomho asks what happened to his face. While invoking a spell, the man says that he used the wall of the water spirit to evolve. As he runs to attack, the man says he is no longer the one the former commander faced. The blood spirit also charges forward. Both attack the protagonist together, who was extremely irritated by this. At the same moment, the Archduke was fighting his opponent while struggling hard to defend against his attacks. Besides Yul Gunchuk, there were still two more members of the bloodthirsty group. Jaehyun thinks that if he uses the Thunder and Wind sword, they will definitely discover that he is from the Grand Master's castle, barely dodging the attack from one of his adversaries. He thinks he has no other choice after all, there aren't too many enemies. The Archduke begins to summon his Thunder sword, but his sister shouts for him not to use it, which leaves him surprised. She runs fervently to his side, managing to defeat one of her brother's opponents. The leader of the Black Masks calls them bastards as he faces both. She speaks telepathically that if they find out they are from the Grand Master's castle, they will come after them like bees. Jaehyun simply agrees. They charge at Yul Gunchuk, who simply tells them to come at him. In the fight between Jiomho and his two opponents, he was defending against both of their strikes. However, Bai Howl becomes even more irritated, along with his companion, who is frustrated at not even being able to touch him. The former commander starts to get surprised by the fact that, for the first time during this battle, he suffered an injury, concluding that only the sword won't help him win, and that he will need to use some magical tricks to deal with his enemies. Confusing the two, he uses a technique to distance himself, creating multiple clones of himself. They are astonished by such a high-level technique. In front of them, there were at least a dozen Jiomho clones. Jin Yobang, surprised, says this is madness. The protagonist says that his master's technique is not limited to sword skills. The white-haired man, angry, asks how he dares use such sorcery in front of him. As he prepares to launch an attack, Jiomho says that it is not sorcery, except in the eyes of the man. The clones simultaneously begin launching various attacks in the air. The adversaries are surprised, not knowing what to do. With great difficulty, they begin to defend against the attacks. Even the blood spirit was completely horrified by such a technique. Unexpectedly, a blade cuts the other side of the white-haired man's face. Trying to launch another attack, he says that either way, he welcomes the protagonist. He attacks while telling the former commander to die, throwing some daggers in his direction. With this attack, he manages to destroy some of the protagonist's clones. While preparing another attack, he shouts, saying he will wipe them all out. He unleashes wind blasts that resemble blades, managing to hit some of the clones, but many manage to dodge. The real one runs between the explosions, preparing to launch an attack. Looking at his opponent, he asks if it was just for these martial arts that he sold his youth. The former commander then tries to attack him. The white-haired man is surprised by the protagonist's strength. Furiously, he stares at his opponent while striking him, generating a series of attacks that pierce through him. In the blink of an eye, Bai Howl was completely wounded, blood gushing out. He falls to his knees in front of the former commander. Looking at his rival, Jiyomo says it would have been better if the white-haired man had forgotten everything and just lived a normal life. While bleeding from his mouth, he musters his strength to ask who the protagonist really is. Without answering his question, he simply delivers the final blow, causing blood to spray everywhere. He turns his attention to his second rival, the blood spirit, who was facing two of his clones. Suddenly, the clones begin to dissolve, surprising his opponent. Jin Yobang, clearly exhausted, smiles nervously as he looks ahead. In front of him was the former captain, holding by Howl's head as he walked toward him, saying that this is the end. The blood spirit is completely terrified and begins to retreat. He looks at the other members while telling Jiyomo to stop. The blood spirit starts screaming desperately, asking his warriors to stop the protagonist. His warriors, filled with fear, are paralyzed, while the former commander looks at them all as if their lives are about to end. The Archduke, looking at the former commander, wonders how he mastered such techniques. Yurin, who is fighting by his side, angrily asks what her brother is looking at. While blocking Yul Bunchuk's attack, her brother runs toward them, trying to deliver an attack. However, the leader of the Black Masks manages to block both of their attacks simultaneously. Suddenly surprising the great warrior, the Archduke appears behind him, managing to strike his shoulder. With the sword still in his shoulder, the warrior turns angrily, trying to attack while the Archduke is still in the air. Still in the air with great effort, the Archduke manages to dodge his head away from the cut, leaving only a small wound. When attacking the Archduke, he turned his back on the princess, who took the opportunity to grab the sword lodged in his shoulder. She holds it with both hands to make sure she can pull it out. The warrior, understanding what she intends to do, becomes scared and nervous. Yurin shouts as she puts all her strength into pulling the sword out. She pulls the sword upward, cutting the warrior's shoulder, who screams in pain, and falls to his knees on the ground with his shoulder cut. The princess looks at the warrior as he falls to the ground. Her brother, with a small cut on his face, says that his sister is truly crazy. Looking at her brother, Yurin reminds him that she told him to never hesitate. As the former commander approaches Jin Yobang, the man feels cornered and asks what the protagonist really is. Jiyomo says the warrior doesn't need to know that, but if he answers all his questions, he might be spared. He feels confused but afraid, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, numerous elders land behind the former commander along with Moyang. She, worried, asks if Jiyomo is okay. He responds that he is. With this, we can see the state of the battlefield, with many elders surrounding the blood spirit, while Bai Howl's body lies on the ground. Jin Yobang laments mentally as he looks around and finds himself surrounded. He looks over the battlefield, seeing all his soldiers dead, including Yul Gunchuk. The warrior also sees the head of the white-haired one lying on the ground. Realizing there is no escape, he asks what questions the protagonist wants to know. Jiyomo asks the blood spirit if behind the elder, there is also a woman with power, which confuses the man. Jin Yobang asks the former commander if he is referring to the woman from the third blood group. The protagonist asks what the name of the man who took her there it is. He calls the elder Talmuk. The former commander says he will not kill the warrior as he leaves. He turns his head and says the spirit must survive on its own now. Suddenly, all the elders point their swords at him, leaving Jin Yobang surprised. The man realizes he has been tricked as he sees the elders pointing their swords at him. Angrily, he calls the protagonist Amundo. As the former commander retreats, we can see the blood spirit fighting the other elders. The princess approaches him, asking if he's okay. He responds again that he is. But Jiyomo looks irritated at a voice laughing. It was Jin Yobang, who says he now understands why he asked Talmuk. With a crazed smile, he says there are no more doubts, declaring that the protagonist is from the Celestial Palace. All the elders, hearing what the warrior says, freeze as they look at him. The princess asks what the Celestial Palace is. The Archduke understands everything that happened and realizes it was probably the former commander who invaded the prison and acquired the martial arts. Confused, Moyang asks if he really was from the Celestial Palace. The former commander regrets not having killed him. Pointing at Jiyomo, he claims that now soldiers from all over Murim probably want to kill him more than he does. He starts laughing as he celebrates his possible victory. The former commander asserts that Jin Yobang is begging to die, charging at the man determined to kill him. The two begin exchanging blows again. With overwhelming speed and strength, they continue their fight. The warrior from the bloodthirsty group says that, just as he suspected, the protagonist is nothing but a mere small dragon. The former commander says he doesn't like killing these dogs from the bloodthirsty group. The warrior from the bloodthirsty group, smiling, says that from now on, everyone will want to kill him. As he strikes, Jiyomo says that for that, they will need to be certain. The blood spirit is thrown backward by the impact. As he prepares to counterattack, the warrior says he will take the former commander with him to hell. His eyes begin to glow red. Shocked, Jiyomo asks if the man intends to use a mutual destruction pact. The man starts to emit a very strong light as the ground around him begins to crack. Even with such pressure, the protagonist merely looks at him, irritated, also invoking his aura, emitting a powerful light. The auras of both begin to collide, causing destruction and mini tornadoes. Both the Archduke and his sister are shocked by what they are witnessing, just like that Moyang and the elders as well. The maddened man commands the former commander to turn to dust. The protagonist concludes that if the blood spirit uses the mutual destruction pact, everyone will be caught and killed. The warrior launches an attack toward all of them, including Jiyomo. Jiyomo closes his eyes as he concentrates. Furious, Yobang asks what the former commander is doing. The attack was approaching him, destroying everything in its path. Suddenly, smoke appears in his place and he vanishes, reappearing in the air with black eyes. He was heading toward the warrior from the bloodthirsty group. The man, astonished, asks if he really jumped into his sea of attacks. The protagonist was being completely cut, but he did not stop, finally closing the distance between them. He was preparing to deliver the final blow to his opponent. The blood spirit was terrified by what he saw. The former commander places his feet on his chest while striking his neck. He was completely consumed by rage. The warrior could not react, only able to scream in pain. Jiyomo finally lands back on the ground while his opponent's body falls. He begins to cough up blood as the price for using his techniques. The princess runs toward him, calling his name. Moyang also shouts for him. He falls to his knees, placing his hand on his chest. Sometime later, soldiers from the Murim factions were carrying the bodies of the warriors from the bloodthirsty group. A man was checking another person's pulse. It was a doctor who was telling Dongbang Seong that he felt the presence of another poison. The young master asks if there is another poison besides the one from the mountain. Still examining the noble's pulse, he says he cannot tell which one, but he still senses a latent poison. Jigel Hyun asks if that means the poison could start spreading at any moment. The doctor says it is impossible for him to decipher at this moment. The noble then says that in the end they will still have to fight against it. The member of the Jabel family asks what could be the reason for them to have done all this. Moyang raises the possibility that they want to kill all the nobles to take control of the Murim factions. All the nobles are surprised by this possibility. Elsewhere, the princess is bandaging the protagonist's leg. Suddenly, something catches the princess's attention. It was the elders of the families looking at them with suspicion and disdain. She whispers to the former commander that it might be a good idea to plan how they will get out of this situation. She telepathically asks her brother to help Jiyomo get out of this situation. He nervously looks at them. Along with the Archduke and the princess, the protagonist heads toward Moyang and the group of young masters. He says he is leaving and is there to say goodbye. She asks where Jiyomo is going. He responds by saying he is living like the wind, so he will go wherever he pleases. The young master of the Jigel family thanks the former commander for saving him. He says it was nothing and that he is leaving now. Unexpectedly, Huangbo Zhongwu blocks his path. The warrior asks if the protagonist thinks they would let someone from the Celestial Palace leave so easily. The former commander merely looks irritated at the young master. Jigel Hyun, outraged, says that Jiyomo saved them and that they should be grateful for that. All the other young masters, including Huangbo, are left speechless. With that, the protagonist simply passes by the man. Some of the young masters watch him pass by, unsure of what to do. He starts to walk away, along with the Archduke and the princess. Now in the city of Luoyang, inside an establishment, there were several dishes on the table. Seated at the table, the Archduke asks if the former commander was really him. He asks if it doesn't seem so. With a smile, the Archduke says he looks very different from the person who stole his identity that day. Jiyomo is then surprised to find out that Jaehyun knew. The princess asks what that means and whether he really stole her brother's identity. The protagonist says that if he tells the story, the Duke would have to kill him right there. Yurin is shocked by what he says and asks what he means by that. As he extends his hand with a bottle, he asks her to take it. They toast together. He asks them to remember this toast as a farewell message. Once again, the princess is surprised and calls his name. The former commander says that the next time they meet, they will be enemies, and that if they have to point their swords at him, they should not hesitate. Jaehyun says that is true, that neither the Celestial Palace nor the Grand Master's castle can get along. Yurin slams her hand on the table, asking what they are talking about. She drinks a bit of sake again. With a mix of shame and anger, the princess says she would never fight against Jiyomo since she likes him, and she asks what farewell message he is talking about. This leaves the protagonist completely speechless. Even the Archduke is at a loss for words, but then the former commander stands up, surprising the girl. He says that they are from completely different worlds and that it would be best to sever any affection they have for each other. He turns and leaves the establishment. Before leaving, he asks them to stay safe. Jiyomo walks away, leaving the Archduke and his sister standing there. She starts crying, asking why it has to be this way. Her brother gently pats her head, trying to comfort her, not knowing what to say. At night, in a forest, the now celestial disciple was leaning against a tree with several empty bottles of drinks around him. Still drinking, he tries to convince himself that he is not in position to worry about others. He opens his eyes, recalling some moments when he saved her from the kunai, when she invited him to go to the championship together, when she kissed him on the cheek, and finally when she thanked him for saving her. Jiyomo says he cannot stay in the same place forever. As he stands up, he says he has no choice but to wander like the wind. He begins to draw his sword. The protagonist speaks, telling whoever it is to appear since he's been waiting for a long time. Suddenly, dozens of soldiers emerge from the shadows in front of him. He asks if the Murim faction's dogs decided to come out on their own. The young master of the Huangbo family approaches, saying they are there because of the Celestial Palace's evil seed. Staring at the protagonist, he says that Jiyomo has a sharp tongue. The celestial disciple then says he never imagined his favor would be repaid in this way. The member of the Huangbo family responds, saying he is doing it for Murim's peace. With that, he orders his soldiers to attack the disciple. Many of them attack him simultaneously. He ducks, dodging one attack. Right after, he moves to the side, dodging another. Thus, the fight continues with many soldiers attacking him simultaneously while he defends and dodges them all. The The young master shouts for his soldiers to try harder to hit him. With that, Jiyomo strikes the soldiers. One of them is hit in the shoulder, another in the hand. Seeing that his soldiers are not enough, the young master charges at him. As he approaches with some of his soldiers lying injured on the ground, the protagonist observes and thinks he must avoid future direct conflicts with Murim factions. The young master attacks fiercely, but the disciple dodges with relative ease. The young master becomes even more furious, cursing him. He raises his sword, preparing for another attack, but again, Jiyomo dodges, making him hit the ground. Taking some distance, the member of the Celestial Palace looks at him. Using one of his master's techniques, the protagonist begins to disappear in front of everyone. Extremely irritated, the young master asks how the former commander dares to use such sorcery. Wangbo Zhongwu steadies himself firmly on the ground. Right after, he dodges an attack that surprises him because he couldn't even see it. He starts looking around, searching for the disciple. As he desperately searches, the protagonist is watched from afar by some men who don't understand what's happening. One of the men watching the fight is the patriarch of the Wiji family. The patriarch says that Jiyomo should kill Wangbo. Another man observing the fight is the young master of the Wiji family. He says that only then will the Murim alliance need their strength. Suddenly, a slightly worn sword appears. It was between the two men watching the fight. It was Jiyomo, pointing his sword at them. With a menacing look, he remains silent, just pointing his sword at them. Jiyomo asks who the man was saying he should kill. Both the man and his son are completely paralyzed. He asks if his old man used the Huangbo family and says that if this happens again, they won't leave alive. With that, the former commander jumps away and leaves. The young master of the Wiji family, angry, thinks they were sure Huangbo Zhongwu would be killed there. The old man says this won't be his last chance and invites his son to leave. Both jump away, leaving the place. Elsewhere, in the middle of a forest, the protagonist is running through the trees. He concludes that this means all the Murim factions are already trying to get rid of him and that he needs a place to hide for a while. Jiyomo arrives at a village called Fallen Moon, where we see a man standing and two others sitting. The man standing stares at the protagonist. The one smoking does the same. As he passes by them, the protagonist repeats the village's name in his mind. He says that although everyone looks like refugees, they are wandering Murim masters, which is why Murim factions can easily enter there. Jiyomo climbs a staircase leading to the Hao family's property. He tells the guard that he is there to speak with Miss Soso. The soldier recognizes him and calls him the Great Warrior. The soldier cheerfully asks the protagonist to enter quickly. Jiyomo enters. Stoso, who was sitting and drinking, recognizes him and also calls him the Great Warrior. She says it's a great moment since they were just talking about him. The man who was sitting cracks a chestnut with his hands. It was an elderly man with white hair and a beard. The man asks if this is the disciple of the Celestial Palace. Soso confirms. He recalls that Yak Qianwang is a legendary assassin, confirming his suspicions that people beyond his imagination are hiding in Fallen Moon Village. Yak Qianwang continues to look at the Great Warrior. The protagonist approaches the legendary assassin and introduces himself, saying it is an honor to meet him. The man with a smile asks if he is also there to hide for a while. Jiyomo confirms the legendary assassin's suspicions, saying he also has a request for Soso. She turns her face to him and says he can ask for whatever he wants. The warrior says he needs information about a person behind one of the elders of the bloodthirsty group named Tamuok. He already knows that this person is a woman. Yak Qianwang asks the Great Warrior if there will be a bloody battle. The protagonist says he is very grateful to that woman. The legendary assassin says that if he harbors certain gratitudes and grudges, he might lose his life sooner. Reflective, Jiyomo says that even if he only lives for one day, he would like to live and die as a human. Yak Qianwang says he likes him and asks if he wouldn't listen to his request. The Great Warrior is confused and curious about what the legendary assassin has to say. Suddenly, the legendary assassin throws one of the chestnuts he was holding at the Great Warrior. The celestial disciple watches in shock as the chestnut comes his way. He manages to dodge by leaning his body back and bending his knees. Seeing the hole the chestnut made in the wall, he concludes that if it had hit his forehead, his head would likely have been split in two. Startled, he asks why the elder is behaving this way with him. Yak Qianwang tells the protagonist to take care of these as well. He starts firing several chestnuts at him. Seeing there was no way out, Jiyomo draws his sword. With black eyes, he begins to move quickly, cutting all the chestnuts in the air. He manages to slice them all without missing a single one. Soso was covering her eyes as fragments of chestnuts flew everywhere. Suddenly, the old assassin lunges toward him. But this time, he doesn't just throw chestnuts, he throws daggers. As the Great Warrior defends against all the daggers, he realizes that the legendary assassin is aiming only at his vital points. Surprisingly, one of the daggers grazes his abdomen. He notices the old assassin is in front of him. But in the blink of an eye, he is already behind the protagonist with a killing intent. He draws a dagger as he prepares to strike. Jiyomo reacts in time, turning to face his opponent. He manages to block the assassin's blade, but his sword cracks. He is shocked by the strength and speed of the assassin. The legendary assassin says that the Great Warrior would have died if he hadn't stopped his knife attack. Struggling to hold back his opponent's knife, he asks how this is possible. The assassin withdraws his knife and asks what the warrior thinks of it. With a slight smile, the assassin says that this is the true strength of an assassin. The warrior looks at him with a mix of irritation and fear. The man tells Jiyomo that if he wants to gain more strength, he must go to the 10 temples of hell. Soso, shocked, asks if that isn't the place that Yak Qianwang couldn't get through. Curious, the protagonist asks why the assassin recommends that place. The old man says that when a new phantom assassin is born, the Great Assassin Bridge, which is currently broken, is reconnected. Looking at the Great Warrior, he says it is also not a bad offer for him. Jiyomo thinks that he really needs a place to practice his master's techniques. He says it's fine, and he will go train. The legendary assassin laughs as he says that tomorrow he will provide a guide for him. At the headquarters of the bloodthirsty group, many people are gathered around someone seated on a kind of throne. The vice commander of the Black Mask Squad says that the Murim factions managed to annihilate the Blood Spirit and Yul Gunshuk along with his entire troop. The supreme leader of the bloodthirsty group asks if they hadn't claimed to have a perfect plan. The first elder says that they reported the presence of a disciple from the Celestial Palace. The third elder says that regardless, they succeeded as they contaminated all the promising youths of Murim with a soul-corroding poison. Confused, the first elder asks what poison that would be. Taemuak says it is a latent poison that causes convulsions after a month. The supreme leader says they will proceed with the plan to awaken Marion. The second elder says that if Marion awakens, they will have to mobilize all the troops of the bloodthirsty group. Everyone present begins to say it's too early for that and that they shouldn't proceed. However, Gu Yangxiuk's right eye shines with a red light that pierces through the room. At that moment, a black aura begins to emanate from him. Everyone kneels before the supreme leader, overwhelmed with pain. As they kneel in pain and cough up blood, they say that this is the power of the demonic aura. With the upper part of his torso completely black, he declares that he is the supreme leader and that if he orders something, they must do it without question. The second elder says he understands while struggling with the pressure. He suppresses his aura once again. Everyone looks at the supreme leader sitting on his throne while they continue to writhe in pain on the ground. Elsewhere, a carriage is racing down a road. Inside this carriage is the protagonist, who confesses that he has been traveling for over 10 days and 10 nights without rest. The man guiding the carriage suddenly stops. Noticing this, the warrior wonders if they have arrived. The man opens the carriage door, informing him that from here on they need to go on foot. They start walking between large canyons. Jiyomo says he knows it's called the 10 Temples of Hell, but even being outside, it already looks like hell. They continue walking between the canyons. Suddenly, something surprises the celestial disciple. It is a large gate, so large that they look like ants next to it. The old man shouts, saying that a challenger has arrived. Suddenly, the gates open. The old man wishes the warrior good luck. Jiyomo thanks him. He enters through the gates. The warrior, determined, says he will see this through to the end. He sees a cabin in the forest with someone crouched by a stream. Jiyomo approaches peacefully. Suddenly, the woman notices his presence and is surprised. She looks at the protagonist standing in front of her. Positioning herself to start a fight, the woman asks who he is. Without answering, he asks who she is. Angry, she asks why he hasn't revealed his identity and says he must be an intruder. Suddenly, she throws several blades in his direction while putting more distance between them. He dodges easily. The blades hit the tree behind him. They were all shuriken. The girl throws some more blades in his direction. Convinced of her victory, she looks at him with a smile. Suddenly, the blades that were stuck in the tree start to return. The warrior notices that the blades, which have been still until now, begin to move. He dodges them with some surprise, noticing a silver wire attached to them, but there were still the ones she had just thrown. He brandishes his sword, and with one movement, he disperses the blades. However, the silver wire wraps around his sword. He is surprised that the blade is now heading directly toward his face. The celestial disciple quickly crouches to avoid the blade. The girl is shocked to see that he dodged all her attacks as he drops one of her shuriken to the ground. She becomes even more irritated. She starts throwing many shuriken in his direction. They begin flying at high speed toward the warrior, who remains still. Lightning starts to emerge from his right eye as he recites the 10 similar swords. With this, several swords appear above him. With a simple swing of his sword, they all move toward the girl's attack. His attack cuts all the silver wires that were attached to the blades. The girl becomes extremely angry as she draws a kunai. She jumps toward him, saying she will kill him, but he easily dodges. She recomposes herself. Now, instead of shuriken, she throws many kunai in his direction. He simply defends against all of them with his sword. He says he's had enough playing around. With that, he charges at the girl. While he is in the air heading towards the girl, she is surprised by the man's reaction. In a panic, she starts throwing many blades in his direction. However, he is already irritated and simply strikes against her. Jiyomo destroys all her blades. The girl cannot believe that with just one simple attack, he managed to destroy all her weapons. But suddenly, some projectiles start heading towards the girl. She closes her eyes, putting her arm in front of her face to protect herself. But then an old man appears and shields her with his own body. The old man, looking at the warrior, curses him as a scoundrel. With just a single motion of his arm, the old man disperses all the projectiles launched by the protagonist. The warrior lands on the ground while the old man stares at him. The old man introduces himself as a guardian of hell and asks if the warrior is trying to kill his disciple. Jiyomo thinks that this must be the reason she is so strong. After all, she is the disciple of the guardian of hell himself. The old man asks if he is the one Qianwang sent. The girl, confused, steps out from behind her master, asking if someone was supposed to come today. Her master calls her Yunhong and says that this is the challenger of the 10 Temples of Hell. The girl asks why the protagonist didn't tell her he was a challenger. He says that even before he could speak, he had already attacked him. Knowing she was wrong, Yunhong pretends not to hear, making a displeased face. The master says that, in any case, he is welcome in hell. He politely greets the master, saying he is under his care from now on. As they sit around a table, the Guardian explains that the first test of the temples tests the basic capacities of a human. Doug Macri says that instead of martial arts or strength, you will have to develop skills like endurance, tenacity, and poison tolerance. Smiling, the girl says that it seems the protagonist won't even be able to pass the first gate. Her master asks if she is still upset about what happened earlier, and Yanhan just pouts. He mentions that Oho couldn't pass the first gate. Giomo says he came here knowing it would be extremely difficult. The Guardian informs him that from the second half of the 10 gates is when one begins to develop their martial skills. If he surpasses them all, he will become a phantom assassin. The warrior asks where the legendary assassin stopped. The Guardian reveals that it was at the 9th gate. He then asks if the protagonist is confident that he will go all the way. He says that, in any case, he will have to try. The Guardian says that Giomo will enter the first gate tomorrow after breakfast, while his disciple comments that he will die. In the castle of the Grand Master, in the Hall of the Thousand Dragons, someone enters the Grand Master's chamber and greets him. The man informs him that the 4th princess and the Archduke have returned. The Grand Master, with a mix of nervousness and concern, stands up. As soon as his children enter the room, he calls Yuren's name. While the princess greets him, he rushes to her, asking if she is hurt anywhere. She asks if, before anything else, she could at least greet the others. To which her father nervously says that it's fine. She begins to leave the hall. Her father asks the Archduke why his daughter has changed so much. His son, looking at him, says that they need to talk about the former commander's master, the man who was imprisoned in the Jade Prison. Her father puts his hand on his head, saying he imprisoned him to strengthen the Murim factions. He tells his father not to worry. When the time comes, she will understand, and it will all only last for a while. Sitting on his throne, very angry, the Grand Master says that if it weren't for the protagonist, it would have erased the Celestial Palace from history entirely. His son says that their biggest concern at the moment is the bloodthirsty group, which is planning to attack them, while they cannot request help from the other families. The Grand Master says he understands, but insists that he must remove all the weeds before they overtake his garden. The Grand Master calls for one of his soldiers to come to him. He orders his soldier to bring Jizian to him. In the canyons where the temples of hell are located, a large explosion occurs. The Guardian notices the explosion and becomes anxious, not knowing what happened. Both he and his disciple run toward the sound, while Giomo remains confused by the reaction. He wonders what is happening there. Suddenly, we can see hundreds of members of the bloodthirsty group running through the canyons. Looking down from above, the Guardian asks what that is. He shouts, ordering to bring out the great beasts. Suddenly, a weapon resembling a cannon appears. From various directions, more emerge. It's when they start firing large arrows toward the members of the bloodthirsty group. Everyone is surprised by such a sudden attack. This attack manages to kill many of them. The Guardian asks how they dare attack the 10 temples of hell. Noticing the Guardian's presence, they prepare for battle. Suddenly, he shouts to the winds, commanding everyone to come out and defend the 10 temples of hell. With that, dozens of soldiers appear. The gate explodes in front of all of them. Angry, he asks if they are trying to destroy the entrance. The protagonist lands behind the Guardian. He asks what is happening there. The Guardian looks at the warrior with irritation and says that he wishes he knew the answer. The master says that this is the largest attack on the temple in recent times and asks who these people are. The warrior tells the Guardian that if it isn't the bloodthirsty group or the Grand Master's castle, then it must be the Murim factions. The girl, angry, asks what he did to make all of Murim his enemy. The Guardian, closing his eyes in frustration, says that when he was informed that the Celestial Palace disciple was the challenger, he should have expected something like this. Suddenly, an explosion occurs below them. The Guardian orders everyone to enter the Iron Blood Cave. His disciple says she will not hide and will fight by his side. The master is surprised by her words. She asks if she hasn't been training to face dangers like this. Suddenly, fragments begin to fly in all directions. Debris falls. The members of the bloodthirsty group are in position. Suddenly, someone orders them to attack. Everyone begins to charge into battle. The old Guardian orders everyone to attack. All the soldiers leap towards the members of the bloodthirsty group. They shout as they advance. Giomo observes that the bloodthirsty group sent many people just to capture him. On one of the hills, there was a man sitting alongside many soldiers as they watched the battle. He was wearing the uniform of the Great Master's castle. This was the 3rd prince of the Great Master's castle. He said that apparently other people had arrived earlier than them. Next to him was the commander of the Sunshine Troops, who said that apparently they were the lackeys of the bloodthirsty group. She asks what they will do if the bloodthirsty group captures the ex-commander first. The prince says that in any case they can kill everyone there. Commander Hugh Yerim simply says they will observe until the situation becomes clear. The battle on the battlefield was very fierce, with members of the bloodthirsty group and the protectors of the infernal temples brutally attacking each other. Suddenly, the Guardian also joins the battle, throwing many blades at the soldiers. His disciple, not very different, attacks several soldiers with his sharp blades. The celestial disciple also decides to join the battle, preparing to strike. He delivers a powerful blow with his sword. At that moment, several members of the bloodthirsty group are cut along with their swords. However, right behind him, there were already 2 more soldiers trying to attack him. He manages to react in time, turning to face his enemies. The ex-commander strikes his opponent, throwing him far away. Irritated, he stares at one of his enemies. Some soldiers were afraid to advance against him. However, a very large shadow behind them starts moving in his direction. The man casting a shadow places his hand on one of the soldiers' heads. He squeezes the man's head, killing him while cursing the soldiers. This was the cavalry master Murim, who orders his soldiers to use stealth. With this, the members of the bloodthirsty group begin to disappear into the air. They confront their enemies while using their abilities. The guardian, extremely irritated, asks how they dare to use that. He charges at his enemies, while launching various blades at them. Even though the attacks hit his enemies, it was as if their bodies were intangible. The guardian's disciple, surprised, asks how this is possible. The warrior moves in to attack, ordering them to back off. Frightened, they look at the man who is coming to attack their adversaries. Chiyomo passes by them, creating waves around him due to his speed, while both jump upwards to avoid being hit. He prepares his attack, motion of the 100 similarities. Transferring his attack, many blades are summoned before him. They strike his enemies, but since they are intangible, they take no damage. The protagonist is surprised by the fact that none of them were hit by his attack. With a determined look, he wonders if this is not enough. With that, he prepares for a new attack while lightning emanates from his arm. As he prepares to strike, it's possible to see many bolts of lightning coming from his body with enormous pressure. He says he will use the phantom energy explosion technique. Someone orders the members of the bloodthirsty group to attack him, and they rush at their enemy. However, Chiyomo also charges at them. He jumps while preparing to deliver a downward strike, leaving all his opponents surprised. When the celestial disciple finally attacks them, they are all sent flying as a great explosion occurs. Unlike the previous attacks, this one causes all the members of the bloodthirsty group who were hit to suffer damage and scream in pain. As he recovers from the strike he delivered, all the members who suffered the attack are lying on the ground, dead. Suddenly, someone strikes a spear on the ground, drawing the attention of the great warrior. It was the cavalry leader who praises his skill. The proud man says that the celestial disciple has skills similar to those he had 10 years ago. Looking at Murim, the protagonist thinks that surely this guy is strong. The man, pointing his spear at the celestial disciple, asks him to grant him a fight. The great warrior charges at his enemy, saying he will do as he asks. Chiyomo delivers an attack against his opponent. The cavalry master, predicting his move, attacks as well. When the ex-commander's sword collides with his spear, the spear becomes intangible. At that moment, the great warrior wonders if this was an illusion. Suddenly, he realizes that the cavalry master managed to wound him superficially. He leaps back, trying to gain distance from his enemy. Gaining distance, he lands on the ground with his clothes torn. The man looks at him and says that now it's his turn. Murim charges at Chiyomo. The man throws several blades with ropes attached. The blades move towards the protagonist in great numbers. He is extremely surprised by what he is seeing. The disciple uses his technique to summon several swords as well. He rushes towards his enemy while his swords go ahead, stopping his blades. The ex-commander manages to destroy all of Murim's blades except one that slips through. Swinging his sword, he manages to destroy the remaining one. The man mentally notes that they have lost all their swordsmen. The great warrior continues charging towards his enemy as fast as possible. The cavalry master tries to strike him, and the celestial disciple reciprocates with his own attack. When their blades collide, a large shockwave can be seen around them. Murim was confident in his victory, smiling maniacally. Chiyomo notices that his opponent is extremely strong as his sword gets damaged. The cavalry master shouts, exerting force. He manages to execute a powerful attack, throwing his opponent far away. Taking advantage of his enemy still being in the air, he tries to strike multiple times. However, with great difficulty, the protagonist manages to block his strikes. Suddenly, his enemy's blade comes towards his face at high speed. But again, with great effort and difficulty, the celestial disciple manages to block the attack. The man shouts as he starts a spinning motion with his spear. Murim increases the speed of this movement even more. The protagonist, defending himself from the attack, notices that his sword is cracking. He decides to stop defending, moving out of the attack's path, and gets a slight scratch on his face. Surprising the cavalry master, he dodges the attack and attempts to strike back. With great difficulty, the master manages to dodge the attack. The celestial disciple begins a series of strikes, trying to hit his enemy. Murim admits to himself that his opponent is indeed powerful. Chiyomo shouts as he rushes towards him in anger. He brandishes his sword, attacking his enemy. With great effort, the cavalry master manages to block his attacks. The cavalry master gets irritated, his eyes turning black as he launches a powerful strike at the celestial disciple. The great warrior blocks the attack, but he ends up being pushed back with impact. The member of the bloodthirsty group once again launches many blades at the protagonist. To defend himself, he summons his blades again. Both continue attacking each other from a distance. As Chiyomo's blades approach him, Murim wonders how this could happen as he swings his spear. With great effort, he swings his spear, defending himself from the great warrior's attacks. But suddenly, something surprises him. A blade was about to strike him in the abdomen. With a mix of irritation and nervousness, he manages to block the blade. He looks at his opponent, who is staring at him from a distance. The man asks if these are the martial arts of the Celestial Palace. While removing his torn cloak, Chiyomo says that, as he mentioned, these are martial arts, but he has not yet mastered them 100%. The master of the bloodthirsty group says there's no reason to let him live any longer. With that, he starts summoning an attack, causing destruction around him. The celestial disciple positions himself to receive the attack. His opponent launches the attack, telling him to die. His enemy's attack is like a large, cutting spiral. As he prepares to receive the attack, the great warrior starts laughing. He looks determinedly at his opponent's attack, confessing that he must increase his power. He begins summoning the Great Light, causing destruction. The giant attack of his enemy approaches, and Jiyomo forms some kind of protection with the light. Suddenly, from the large sphere of light, blades begin to emerge. With the movement of his hand, these blades head towards his enemy's attack. The blades penetrate the spiral. A powerful explosion can be seen. The Guardian and his disciple look in shock at such power. The explosion was so intense that everyone on the battlefield stopped fighting to witness it. The man with black eyes and red pupils was clearly exerting great effort. Not much different, the protagonist with black eyes and blue pupils was also putting in great effort. Both prepare to stab their opponent. They stab each other without revealing who the true victor is. We can see that the cavalry master was pierced by the celestial disciple's sword. The great warrior, exhausted, laughs while his enemy's spear is at his neck, superficially. The bloodthirsty group's soldier looks in shock at his opponent's blade in his chest. Jiyomo places his other hand on his sword. He looks determined and angry at his opponent. Suddenly, he turns, pulling his sword and slashing his opponent's chest up to his shoulder. As he falls to the ground, the man repeats the name of the celestial palace. The protagonist stands while his opponent falls dead on the ground. He looks at his enemy's body, making sure he won't get up. In pain, he places his hand on his right chest. Unexpectedly, he starts coughing blood while clearly feeling extreme pain. Still holding his right chest, he kneels down, resting his sword on the ground as he tries to recover. The Guardian faces several soldiers as he tries to reach him. His disciple also defeats numerous enemies. She looks at Jiyomo, calling out to him. Her master yells for her to help him instead of shouting his name. The members of the bloodthirsty group say that the celestial disciple has finally fallen to the ground and that they should capture him as quickly as possible. Yeonhong rushes forward, shouting that the ex-commander cannot die like this. She throws two of her blades, trying to stop some members of the bloodthirsty group who were advancing on the celestial disciple. She manages to hit them, leaving the protagonist surprised. Extremely tired and wounded, he looks up at one of the cliffs. Above him were Jaesong and Yerim. Looking down, the prince says it's time for them to reveal themselves and orders his soldiers to kill everyone. The prince wears a somber expression as hundreds of soldiers leap from behind him. Soldiers shout as they head towards the battlefield. Both the temple soldiers and the bloodthirsty group members look at the crowd, stunned. Even the guardian of the temples stares at the shocking scene. Suddenly, the members of the Great Master's castle begin to indiscriminately kill everyone on the battlefield. The girl, shocked, asks who it is this time as she helps Jiyomo up. Seeing all those soldiers, he wonders if they are from the Great Master's castle. One of the Great Master's castle members shouts that they have spotted the ex-commander and that they must kill the traitor. Looking at them angrily, he thinks that even though he was eating from the same pot with them, not long ago, this is how it ends. Soldiers leap to attack him, but Yeonhong stops them. She throws several of her blades towards the enemies. The Guardian's disciple manages to hit them all, causing them to fall to the ground. The third prince orders his soldiers to keep advancing. Even the soldiers hit by the girl start to get up, preparing for another attack. The girl notices that there are too many soldiers to fight. She is surprised to see that the celestial disciple is getting up. Despite being injured and exhausted, he tells her to move away again. Jiyomo stands face to face with a horde of soldiers. Once again, with lightning coming from his right eye, he uses his motion of the 100 similarities attack. With this, he summons his blades. The soldiers ignore it, still trying to strike him, but he shouts in rage while swinging his arm. With that, all the blades rush towards the soldiers. In the blink of an eye, many of his enemies are cut down. His comrades see the bodies of the other castle members falling. All of them look in shock at the great warrior, who in turn charges at the enemies. All the soldiers in fear look up at where the celestial disciple is coming from. He brandishes his sword, delivering a series of attacks. Many screams can be heard as blood spreads across the battlefield. The protagonist manages to cut down all the soldiers in front of him. He pants heavily as he looks ahead. In front of him were many more soldiers staring at him. They glare at him as someone approaches among them. It was the prince, who mentally confesses that Jiyomo is indeed strong and that he must kill him right there, ordering his subordinates to pressure him a bit more. The great warrior, exhausted and injured, looks at Jaesong. The celestial disciple thinks to himself that his vision is getting blurry, but his thoughts are interrupted when yet another crowd of soldiers rushes towards him. He positions himself to try and attack all the soldiers at once, but the Guardian steps in front of him, leaving him surprised. The Guardian remains still, even as all the soldiers charge at him. Suddenly, the Guardian assumes a fighting stance, generating waves around him. Even the great warrior is surprised by such a turn of events. The Guardian then begins shouting, demonstrating his strength. With his bare hands, he starts delivering a series of blows. All the soldiers hit by this attack had their bodies pierced. Except for the soldiers who did not charge against them, all of their bodies were torn apart. The soldiers begin to fall with their bodies pierced thanks to the Guardian's attack. The Guardian turns to the protagonist and asks if he is okay. The Guardian asks Jiyomo to take his disciple to the Iron Blood Cave and seal the entrance. Confused, the celestial disciple asks what the Guardian will do. He firmly says that he must do as ordered or else he will die right there. At that moment, dozens of soldiers from the Great Master's castle begin moving in their direction. The Guardian takes out a small bundle from his hand. He throws it on the ground, creating a large cloud of smoke. Surprised, the soldiers start shouting that it's a smoke bomb. The Guardian tells the Celestial Disciple to take this opportunity. Macri tells the Great Warrior to become the Phantom Assassin and avenge him. The ex-commander feels irritated and powerless as he looks at the Guardian. Understanding that there was no other way, he decided to do as instructed. While the girl was fighting some soldiers from the Great Master's castle, the Celestial Disciple quickly approaches. He grabs her and runs while she remains surprised and confused. As he carries her, running desperately, Yunhong asks what he thinks he's doing. He informs her that it's the Master's order and that she must guide him to the Iron Blood Cave. She stretches her arm, calling for her master. One of the soldiers notices that Jiaomo and the girl are escaping and orders everyone to chase them. However, Macri intercepts them, surprising the soldiers. One of the soldiers tries to strike the Guardian. He blocks the soldier's attack with a kunai. The Guardian sees the ex-commander and his disciple running. As she is being carried, she cries, calling for her master. Even though he is clearly irritated and uncomfortable with the situation, the Great Warrior keeps running. At the Great Master's castle at the outer gates, an army could be seen standing still. On top of the outer walls, 3 imposing figures could be seen. They were the Great Master, along with the Archduke and the 4th Princess. Many soldiers from the bloodthirsty group stood in front of the castle. It was also possible to see many soldiers from the Verdant Forest faction. The Great Master observes from above, saying that the bloodthirsty group even brought the Verdant Forest faction with them. The Archduke informs that as soon as the Moyang family finds the antidote for the latent poison, the Miran factions will come to help. Yurin, clearly irritated, looks at her brother and says they cannot just wait. The Great Master agrees that the 4th Princess is right and that they must start immediately. Suddenly, members of the bloodthirsty group begin beating drums. They start shouting, demonstrating their strength. With that, the army of the bloodthirsty group and the Verdant Forest faction begin advancing towards the castle. The Great Master shouts, ordering everyone to protect the castle, saying they cannot lose to the bloodthirsty group. He commands his soldiers to advance with hundreds of them, leaping into the battle. The 4th Princess takes the lead in the battle, going along with her soldiers. She prepares to unleash a powerful strike. With determination and strength, she swings her sword forward. With that single strike, she manages to cut off the heads of 2 enemies. Yurin lands among her enemies, surprising everyone. She shouts as she positions herself to deliver another strike. Spinning her sword, she manages to hit many enemies at once. The Archduke watches his sister fighting fiercely. He thinks that all of this is that man's fault. Snapping back to reality, he notices that many soldiers are coming to attack him. Jaehyun shouts as he prepares to fight back. Clearly irritated, he swings his sword at his enemies. He manages to cut down one of them. Determined, he continues advancing, shouting as he goes. His sister, similar to him, determined and angry, also shouts as she advances. Returning to the battle in the canyons where the infernal temples are located, the protagonist and the girl fall to the ground. The girl cries as she mourns for her master. Jiaomo, frustrated, tells her that they will die if she doesn't pull herself together and asks where the cave is. The girl says the cave is beyond that rock. She points to a large rock just above them. The Celestial Disciple suddenly gets startled by something and is surprised. A kind of blade heads in their direction. The ex-commander desperately yells for the girl to duck. He pushes the Master's disciple, making her fall to the ground. The thrown blade suddenly begins to return. It flies back into the hand of someone who grabs it effortlessly. The protagonist and the Master's disciple look up in fear, seeing 2 figures. Suddenly, those 2 figures vanish. They land in front of them. It is the prince and the commander. The prince, confident, asks if that's all the protagonist has to show him. Jiaomo looks at him cursing. The Celestial Disciple asks the girl telepathically how they will get into the cave. The girl says there is a lever next to the entrance. He notes that the distance to the rock is 3 meters. Looking again at his opponents, he concludes that they will have only one chance. The ex-commander speaks telepathically to the Master's disciple, telling her to enter the cave while he distracts the 2 of them. He says that once she gets inside, she must blow up the entrance. She asks what he will do being so injured. The commander, irritated by the fact that they haven't done anything yet, asks what they are thinking. With that, she uses her whip, which has a blade at the tip, to attack them. The Guardian's disciple is surprised as the blade comes toward her head. She dodges with great difficulty as the blade hits the ground, causing an explosion. The woman is clearly proud and confident. The disciple looks at the ground, realizing that the blade suddenly begins to rise again. But then Jiaomo jumps towards the whip, trying to cut it. With the strike of his sword, he manages to cut it, even though he is very injured and exhausted. Angry and irritated, she asks how the Celestial Disciple dares to cut her whip. To her surprise, the prince orders her to step back. Jae-sung then says that if Jiaomo kneels and begs for his life, maybe he will spare him. The ex-commander then says that he is no longer part of the Great Master's castle and has no obligation to show respect, even to the 3rd prince. The prince then calls him a traitor and accuses him of stealing the Great Master's castle's secret. With a smile, he asks if he really stole the Great Master's castle's secret. Positioning himself for battle, the Great Warrior says they are indeed correct. Jae-sung prepares to strike while saying that it seems he really isn't afraid of death. He launches an attack towards the Great Warrior. In turn, Jiaomo sees the attack coming his way and starts moving. With great difficulty due to his injuries and exhaustion, he manages to block the prince's attack. As his sword cracks even more, he is clearly exhausted and severely injured. Even though he blocks the attack, the force of the impact begins pushing him back. Jiyomo starts bouncing on the ground, unable to steady himself. The prince takes advantage of his opponent's opening to attack again. As he approaches the ex-commander, he says that it seems the Celestial Palace is nothing special. Irritated and arrogant, he strikes his opponent again. Jiyomo blocks the attack once more, but is thrown back again. This time he lands on the ground, kneeling. Without giving the disciple a chance to recover, the prince charges again. He begins to channel wind into his blade. Jae-sung starts preparing his attack called Wind and Rain, Sword and Thunder. It's clear that this is a powerful attack, but Jiyomo also begins to prepare himself, once again summoning that light. He shouts, trying to gather strength to withstand the attack. His opponent also shouts to show his determination and rage. Suddenly, a new massive explosion can be heard and seen. Even Murim, who is with the prince, raises her cloak in front of her face to shield herself from the shrapnel flying across the battlefield. When the smoke clears, we can see the great warrior kneeling on the ground with his sword severely worn. Unexpectedly, he starts coughing up a lot of blood. Standing before him is Jae-sung, who says it is indeed impressive that he managed to block his sword, but that this was the last time. Proudly looking at the ex-commander, he asks if he should really kill a traitor so easily. With that, he delivers several superficial cuts to the celestial disciple's body. The protagonist cries out in pain as he is attacked. Even as he suffers numerous attacks, he thinks that this is his last chance, and that he must endure a little longer. While laughing, the prince says that, in any case, the ex-commander will die from blood loss. At this moment, the master's disciple shouts Jiyomo's name. As lightning emanates from his body, he starts laughing while looking at Jae-sung. He summons his blades while striking with his sword. The prince steps back, asking what he is doing. The proud man begins defending against Jiyomo's attacks. Irritated and nervous, the prince wonders how he still has the strength to launch such an attack. With that, the ex-commander leaps, attempting to escape, while Jae-sung, surprised, tries to stop him. The commander asks how he dares to try to escape as she attempts to strike him. He is startled by the approaching whip. The celestial disciple manages to repel the whip with his sword. One of the soldiers notices that the traitor is fleeing and orders his comrades to chase him. He lands near the girl, who looks surprised at his condition. She activates the mechanism to open the door. As the entrance opens, the girl shouts for him to run through it. With that, he rushes inside. She shouts, saying he must complete his training and become the Phantom Assassin. After that, she throws dynamite on the ground. She jumps away instead of entering the cave. The soldiers enter the cave, saying it's that way. One of them approaches the lever but becomes curious and asks what that sound is. He realizes it's a bomb thrown on the ground and curses. But before he can finish, the bomb explodes, throwing everyone away. Many fragments and debris begin to fall from the cave. With the entrance completely covered, the prince and his soldiers stare at the sight. Jae-sung, irritated, tells them to find another way to enter the cave. The soldier, lowering his head, says the entrance was destroyed and they haven't found another passage. The commander says the area around the cave is completely surrounded and that they can kill him as soon as he comes out. The prince, annoyed, says they almost had him. Inside the cave, while some pieces of rock are still falling, Jiyomo is lying on the ground, completely injured. Clenching his fists, he says that he will surely become the Phantom Assassin as he looks ahead with a mix of hatred and determination. On a night when heavy rain is falling, lightning strikes the canyons. Two guards stand watch at the old cave entrance. One of the guards says it's been 7 months. He mentions that the prince is going crazy. Many lightning bolts strike, catching their attention. The guard says that Jae-sung might want to guard the cave for 1 or 2 years, waiting for Jiyomo, but he's probably dead after being crushed. After all, no one could survive a collapse like that. His colleague tells him to shut up and just follow orders. He agrees but says that the orders should at least make sense. His colleague recalls the battle fought against the ex-commander and the great explosion that destroyed the cave entrance. The man then says it wouldn't be impossible for Jiyomo to have survived. Suddenly, electricity starts emanating from the debris. 2 lightning bolts strike extremely close to the soldiers, frightening them. One of them says the weather is turbulent, as if something is drawing the lightning there. The electricity emanating from the debris grows even stronger. Unexpectedly, a massive lightning bolt strikes the old entrance. The guard shouts, saying the lightning will hit them. The lightning causes a great explosion, throwing both of them away. They are dragged by the impact along the fragments of rock. From the pile of stones, while fragments still fall from the explosion, electricity can be seen emanating. One of them looks in that direction, still trying to understand what happened. Surprised, he asks what that is. Now it becomes clear that it is Jiyomo, appearing as just the figure of a man surrounded by electricity. He starts walking towards the soldiers. As a large bolt of lightning strikes behind him, the man looks at the guards. The fallen soldier begins to shout, asking if that is Jiyomo. The severely injured guard tries to activate an emergency whistle, but without even changing his expression, the ex-commander looks at him. Suddenly, the soldier's hand begins to receive a strong shock, burning it. As the soldier writhes on the ground, the celestial disciple has his hand wrapped in electricity. He lowers his head slightly as he recalls what happened, remembering when he clenched his fists, saying he would definitely become the Phantom Assassin. When he determinedly made that decision and looked ahead, and saw the cave with its great lake. The great warrior was still lying at the entrance, too weak to stand, when he felt something falling into his hand. He He looks up, trying to understand why it fell on him. That's when he sees many blades pointing at him along with sharp stones, becoming very frightened, unsure of what it means. Suddenly, all of them begin falling in his direction. He looks at the scene in horror, not knowing what to do. As he looks determinedly ahead, Jiyomo says he was trapped in the iron cave but has now returned. The ex-commander begins walking among the debris amidst the rain. Both soldiers, terrified and fearful, think they will now meet their end. As the protagonist approaches, one soldier cowers, trying to protect his head. However, the ex-commander simply walks past them without saying or doing anything, leaving them confused. The soldier, surprised and still wary, wonders if they were spared. But suddenly, the celestial disciple begins to summon lightning with his hand. And unexpectedly, the soldiers and the entire pile of rocks explode behind him. The protagonist continues walking as debris falls behind him. He looks forward with a determined and angry expression as dozens of lightning bolts strike behind him amidst the rain. In a peaceful city, people walk and talk. We can see the door of an establishment slightly ajar. Inside, a man welcomes whoever may be entering. It is an elderly man who asks the younger man if there is a place for an old man like him. The younger man is surprised by what the elder says. Nervous, the man tells the elder to make himself comfortable and asks what he would like. The elder thanks the young man for his kindness and says he would like some noodles. The young man brings some noodles for the elder. The attendant says the dumplings are on the house and invites him to eat as much as he likes with a smile. The elder asks how he could eat something for free. The elder watches the young man as he walks away and asks if his back doesn't hurt. The man, startled, asks how the elder knows about such things. The young man admits to the elder that his back feels like it's going to break and that his diarrhea won't go away. The elder asks if he also struggles to digest simple foods like porridge, explaining that it's because the cold has infiltrated his organs. The man, placing his hand on his head, says his biggest fear is that he won't be able to find a job because of it. The man kneels on the floor, saying he would give every penny if the elder would help him. As the elder helps him up, he says that the kindness shown to him was more than enough. After some time, the elder instructs him to take the herbs as he had advised, assuring him he would feel better within a month. The young man thanks him and asks for his name. The elder, smiling broadly, says it's best to simply address him as an old man with a deep interest in medicine. The man thanks the elder as he simply smiles. Suddenly, the elder looks both surprised and angry. The elder pushes the young man aside, telling him to pay attention. The elder, placing his hand on his back, begins to draw a small hatchet. With that, he starts throwing multiple hatchets in one direction. With great agility, he begins to slice through the air. The young man is surprised to see throwing stars being deflected by the elder and hitting the wall. Everyone inside the restaurant begins to panic as the blades pass by them. Some of them start hitting the customers. Everyone present in the restaurant starts running outside, shouting that it's too dangerous. Outside, there are some members of the Verdant Forest faction. The young man calls out to the elder, confused as the elder urges him to hurry and leave. The young man asks how he could leave the elder alone. One of the faction's soldiers then throws more attacks in their direction, but the elder stands firmly on the ground. While defending against his enemy's daggers, the elder tells the young man to go, otherwise he will only be a hindrance. The young man says he will run to the authorities. The soldier says they have finally found him and asks if the elder is Shinsu Seongri and if he is trying to help the young masters with the poison. As they advance towards the elder, they say they cannot let him leave alive. The elder prepares to strike back at them. After swinging his hatchet, the elder manages to unleash a powerful attack in their direction. One of the soldiers struck by the elder's attack is completely pierced. As another soldier dodges his fallen comrade's body, he says that, as expected, the elder is not someone to be underestimated. As Seongri prepares to launch another attack, one of the members also tries to strike him. The elder shouts as he swings his hatchet. He manages to kill all his attackers with a single blow. After his devastating strike, all his enemies fall to the ground dead. However, something catches his attention and he quickly turns around. Looking at the door, he realizes that the Verdant Tree faction didn't just send soldiers, they sent dozens of them. The man leaning against the door says he truly lives up to his name. Seongri recognizes the man as the demonic Bloodwind swordsman of the Verdant Tree and wonders if he really came personally. The elder says he must escape at all costs to heal the promising Murim youths and thwart the bloodthirsty group's plans. The swordsman calls him a disgrace but says he must kill him regardless in order to survive. Staring intently at the elder, the swordsman declares he will kill him. All the soldiers from the Verdant Tree faction charge at the elder. The elder charges towards his opponents. While attacking, he declares that the one who will die today is that man. He quickly strikes all the soldiers. Seongwei runs through his enemies, striking them, but something catches his attention. He unleashes several attacks against the enemies, managing to take down many of them. But as he grows tired, he looks up in surprise. Above him, various soldiers are launching attacks from the air. With the strikes closing in, the elder is momentarily frozen. However, he quickly regains his composure and leaps to the side, dodging the attacks. Even though he dodges, one of the attacks manages to hit the back of his thigh. He turns, irritated by his opponent's cowardice. Landing on the ground with a smile, he prepares to counterattack. but he is unable to as his adversaries launch another wave of attacks. With great difficulty, he defends against most of the strikes. However, one of them manages to hit his shoulder. The force of the impact sends the elder flying backward. He lies on the ground, still staring at his opponents. Surprisingly, someone begins walking toward him. As he draws his sword, the Bloodwind swordsman says he cannot allow the elder to live, as he will find a way to help the Murim factions. Staring down the fallen elder, the swordsman declares that this is why he must kill him. The swordsman charges at the elder, attempting to strike. Suddenly, something moves at incredible speed. The object heads straight for the swordsman's head, surprising him. With great effort, the man manages to block the attack, but he is thrown back. Looking at the wall, the man realizes the object was just a set of chopsticks. The swordsman shouts, demanding to know who would dare interfere in his fight. Everyone looks at a mysterious man who is calmly eating his meal. The man calmly says the swordsman is too noisy, and that it is disturbing his meal. The soldiers rush at the man, saying he will eat in the afterlife. The man simply taps his hand on the table. With that, a few chopsticks float. He taps his hand on the chopsticks, propelling them with force. The chopsticks fly straight towards his enemies. One of them strikes a soldier in the heart. The soldier is thrown back by the impact. Pierced, he falls backward, screaming in pain. And we see that it wasn't just one but 3 soldiers who were struck by the man. The elder is shocked by such a technique and strength. The demonic swordsman looks at the mysterious man in disbelief. Both the elder and the member of the Verdant Tree faction watch the mysterious man seated. The elder asks if the man is from the Murim League. With his head lowered, shrouded in suspense, he replies that he is not. While the soldier draws his sword, he tells the man to just mind his own business and leave. Still without showing his face, the man says he hasn't finished his meal. The demonic swordsman charges at the mysterious traveler, saying he will kill him. The traveler calmly grabs one of the chopsticks on the table. With brutal rage, the swordsman attacks him from above. The man who was eating simply moves to the side with absurd speed. When the swordsman finally lands his strike, he slices the table in 2. The man appears behind the swordsman and says that the one who will die will be him, leaving him shocked. The mysterious traveler suddenly unleashes an attack. The soldier finally turns to face his opponent. He is close, ready to strike with the chopstick he grabbed earlier. Afterward, there's a spray of blood. The man looks at the elder after killing his enemy with a single blow. The swordsman's body simply collapses to the ground. Xiangwei, horrified, observes that the man killed the demonic Bloodwind swordsman with just one attack using wooden chopsticks. He asks who he is. He then looks at the bodies on the ground, thinking he must leave this place first. The elder says the authorities will arrive soon and asks if they could talk elsewhere. The protagonist says that if the elder wants to treat him, he won't refuse. Xiangmi smiles and says he'll buy him a drink afterward. In another location, as the sun was setting, the celestial disciple was sitting with the elder at a table in an establishment. The elder, suspicious, asks if he could know his name. With his face partially covered, the protagonist says he may call him someone with a deep grudge against the bloodthirsty group. Chigamho then asks the elder why the bloodthirsty group is hunting him, noting that they likely wouldn't be well off if they killed him. The elder says that since Jiaomo is apparently also an enemy of the bloodthirsty group, he can tell him. Xiangwei explains that the factions are still not cured of the bloodthirsty group's latent poison, which is why they urgently hired him, and he is on his way there. The Phantom Assassin is surprised by this information, wondering how they still haven't been cured. The protagonist then asks if those with the Celestial Dragon's virtue are also in the same condition. The elder, looking down, responds affirmatively. It is still possible to see drinks on the table. The elder states that those affected by the latent poison are left as if they are in a coma. They remain alive but lose their souls. The great warrior, confused, asks what he means by losing their souls. The elder is surprised as he recalls that this must be the law of the Great Calamity, the same one Muak used at the Celestial Palace. The elder notices the young man's agitation and grows curious. Looking at Jiaomo, Xiangwei states that he certainly knows about the latent poison. The ex-commander looks at the elder and asks how he came to such a conclusion. Xiangwei says that the man's breathing and heartbeat are unusual for someone who is merely surprised. The elder then asks for the formula to neutralize the poison. The protagonist thinks that if he reveals the law of the Great Calamity, the elder will certainly find a formula. But he also wonders how the elder will react when he finds out that he is a disciple of the Celestial Palace. He remembers that the masters of the Murim factions did not hide their hostility toward him. He says that if Moyang hadn't intervened, it would have killed him right there. With an angry expression, he wonders if it is really necessary to save them again. But he also recalls that all those who possess the Celestial Dragon's virtue helped him. He remembers that Soso helped him hide and even bought him time to escape. He says he cannot turn his back on them. Jiaomo asks if the elder has ever heard of using poisons through magic. The elder, surprised, says he doesn't know the principles to be able to help. As night falls, the protagonist explains the principles to Sangui. The elder, excited, says that now that he knows the principles, detoxifying will be easy. With a slight smile, Jiaomo says that is to be expected from him. After all, he is the best in the world. The elder gratefully thanks the ex-commander for helping him, saying that if it weren't for him, he wouldn't be able to cure them. Someone calls out to Elder Sangui, surprising the elder, who turns to look. It was soldiers entering the establishment calling for him. 4 soldiers stand before the elder and the celestial disciple. The elder asks if they are soldiers of the Murim League. As they remove their hoods, the soldiers confirm they are from the Murim League and express their surprise at seeing corpses at the location, where they were supposed to meet. As the man sighs, he says that, as expected, Seongwei is doing well. The protagonist stands up, saying that he will leave now. With a smile, the elder says he will never forget this encounter. The man says they will meet again if fate wills it. He walks past the Murim League soldiers who stare at him. The girl mentally notes that this person seems very familiar. As the celestial disciple leaves the establishment, she continues to stare at him, saying that strangely, he feels very familiar. The girl appears to understand something and asks the man to wait. As the woman prepares to follow the celestial disciple, the elder calls her, telling her to wait. The elder says that he is internally injured and asks if she could bring him first aid kit. Nervous and flustered, the woman says she will while getting ready to fetch it. As the soldiers tend to the elder, he says that it appears Jeomho is running from them, so he will help him leave safely. The elder mentally thanks him, saying that thanks to him, they can now save the lives of the promising young members of the Murim factions. He walks through the city at night under the moonlight. Irritated with himself, he says this will be the last time he helps the Murim factions. On that same night, at the Great Master's castle, the Archduke sits at a table while reading some sort of document. Suddenly, something catches his attention, causing him to be surprised. Telepathically, he asks someone if there was an explosion around the Iron Blood Cave due to lightning. The person informs him that both soldiers guarding the cave are dead. He asks if there are truly no survivors. The person confirms again, and the Archduke orders them to reinforce the perimeter. As he walks through his room, the person affirms that they will carry out his orders. He walks to his balcony, arms crossed, observing the surroundings. He mentally asserts that he is certain Jeomho died that day. He convinces himself that now is the time to launch an attack against the Bloodthirsty group. He confesses that it has been 7 months since the Bloodthirsty group, along with the Verdant Tree faction, invaded, and even though they managed to halt the attack, their energy reserves were reduced by 30%. Someone is training with their sword, holding it firmly. It is the fourth princess training during the night. With speed and precision, she slices hundreds of leaves from trees. Suddenly, she firmly plants her foot on the ground, creating a hole. With the impact force of her foot, she lifts many stone fragments. Irritated, she prepares to unleash a series of strikes. With her combo of attacks, she manages to cut all the fragments while fiercely brandishing her sword. The stone fragments are perfectly split in half. As a cloud of dust disperses around her, with fragments falling everywhere, she remains in the same spot, untouched. She speaks the name of the Bloodthirsty group as the wind blows across her face. As she leaves the training field, she declares that she will not stand still. Meanwhile, in the Fallen Moon village, on a table were some bowls of food. Sitting at the table were Jeomho and Soso. The ex-commander mentions that he wondered how the Bloodthirsty group and the Great Master's castle managed to attack the Iron Blood Cave. Soso states that the Hao family mobilized their information network to track down those who leaked their location, and after that, the legendary assassin killed them all. Surprised, he repeats the name of the great assassin. Soso says the old assassin was injured and returned to his hometown to recover. Lowering his head, Jeomho expresses his wish to thank him. She smiles and says she will relay his message to the elder. The ex-commander asks about the current state of the conflict between the Bloodthirsty group and the Great Master's castle, saying he heard rumors that the castle is struggling to hold on. She informs him that the Bloodthirsty group has deployed its best troops, making it difficult to handle them. He asks if it's true that the castle is on the verge of collapse. She replies that the men who died were just common warriors, that although some of the generals and elders have perished, most of the generals are still alive and well. While picking up one of the bowls, she says they cannot expect the Great Master's castle to simply crumble easily. Jeomho says that it seems the war will continue for a long time. She remarks that, on the contrary, the Bloodthirsty group might collapse first. Feeling irritated, he thinks that at this point it's impossible to predict who will win or lose. At that moment, someone opens the door, calling the ex-commander's name, surprising him. It is Xinwan, along with the old guardian Macri, who mentioned that it seems he really came back alive. The guardian, surprised, asks if he truly managed to pass through the 10 temples of hell. He apathetically responds that he did while looking at both of them. The phantom assassin reflects, stating that he obviously fought hard. He recalls when he was entering the cave, still heavily injured and exhausted from the last battle. He sees a wooden door that catches his attention. He opens it, observing what awaits him. The room is a sort of storage filled with many books and weapons. He stands there, speechless, unsure of what it all means. He notices that on the ground there are some bundles of herbs. There are also fish and fruits, seemingly fresh, and many books containing combat techniques. With one of these books in hand, he looks back while observing a weapon. He takes them, preparing himself for what may come. The great warrior prepares a backpack containing water, food, and a few medicinal herbs. He ties the backpack to his body with a rope as he gets ready to leave. Now equipped, he begins to exit the room. He carries several spears and some swords, along with his backpack full of supplies. He sees something shining inside the cave and moves toward it. As he walks through the dark tunnel, he can only see a light at the end of it. He states that ever since he entered the 10 temples of hell, these things started appearing before him. Looking up, surprised and frightened, Jeomho realizes he is on some kind of platform. Above him, dozens of figures are looking down at him, all wielding weapons. The figures jump all at once into the pit. They begin to land in front of him, all carrying various weapons, some even wielding two. Upon closer inspection, he realizes they are not people but a type of golem. He is surprised, unsure of what these things are or if they are friendly. One of the golems looks at him with a glowing gaze. Suddenly, the being hurls a sword at him, attempting to strike. He watches in fear as the sword comes his way. With great effort, he manages to dodge the strike from his enemy. However, the sword grazes his face, causing him to bleed and leaving him even more shocked. All of his opponents rush at him desperately. He charges toward them, admitting they are all very fast. Jiamo is about to collide with his dozens of enemies. He prepares his attack, attempting to pierce them. With his strike, he manages to pierce through one of his enemies, splitting it in half. Another golem leaps, trying to attack him. He dodges the attack and swings his sword to counter. His sword gets the golem, but it causes no damage. He looks at his sword, which is now broken in half. He glares angrily at his opponent, blood dripping from his wound. As he prepares to strike with his spear, he declares he must rely solely on it. With a single strike, he manages to shatter the golem's head. Suddenly, another creature attacks him from behind. Now more accustomed to the fight, he dodges the attack with ease. He jumps back, evading the monster's strike, and stares at it. Quickly recovering, he throws his spear at his enemy. With the force of the throw, the enemy's head is disconnected from his body. He throws his broken sword to the ground. He then starts wielding another sword that was on his back. While holding a sword in his right hand, he prepares another spear in his left. Jiamho looks at the golems, determinedly stating that he must survive no matter what. Meanwhile, the creatures run toward him as he remains still, waiting for them. After some time, he is left with only a spear and a sword on the battlefield, surrounded by weapons. He notices that the ceiling is filled with blades pointed at him. The great warrior is shocked, not understanding how this is possible. Suddenly, all the blades are launched in his direction. He braces himself, preparing to defend against them. He begins swinging his sword, delivering a series of strikes in the air. Despite all his efforts, some blades manage to graze him. Realizing there is no escape, he starts dodging them, trying to flee. However, exhausted, he ends up falling to the ground. Still on the ground, he groans in pain. But before he can catch his breath, a barrage of arrows is fired at him. As he dodges the blades, he admits there's no space to rest. With great difficulty, he throws himself to the side, avoiding the arrows. However, to his surprise, one of the arrows hits his leg. He falls to the ground as more arrows land around him. Exhausted and wounded, he props himself up, trying to catch his breath. Looking ahead, he says it's finally over. Shocked and still very tired, he looks up. And again, another horde of blades comes his way. He grips his sword tightly, preparing to attack. Looking angrily at the blades, he curses mentally. The spears come toward him as he stares them down. With his eyes turning white, he begins to scream as he swings his sword. In another moment, he finds himself on a cliff, leaning on his spear while floating above thousands of blades. As he administers first aid to himself, he says he has no time to waste and must leave this place as quickly as possible. Suddenly, the sound of hundreds of footsteps can be heard. These were more golems wearing dragon masks and golden robes coming his way. He brutally cuts down every one of them that approaches. One of the creatures gets close to him but has his head sliced off in a single blow. With a crazed look, he tells them all to give it their all, declaring that he will undoubtedly pass through the 10 temples of hell. After the fierce battle, he walks among the hundreds of monster corpses he has slain. When he arrives somewhere, he stops abruptly. As he observes a large door, he wonders if this is the next gate. Standing in front of the massive stone door, he simply stares at it. He decides to try opening it, placing his hands on it and pushing. Jiamo begins to open the gate despite his many injuries and exhaustion. Now with the gate open, he walks inside, trying to see what awaits him as fragments of stone fall around him. His eyes widen in surprise. The celestial disciple thanks them, saying that he now knows the killing techniques and has passed through the 10 temples of hell, becoming the Phantom Assassin. Soso is surprised to hear about the killing techniques. The legendary assassin is even more astonished that he passed through the 10 temples of hell. The Guardian, on the other hand, is shocked that he has become the Phantom Assassin. Both simultaneously ask if he truly passed through the 10 temples of hell, and if he has indeed become the Phantom Assassin. The old assassin asks the protagonist to prove that he passed through the 10 temples of hell and became the Phantom Assassin. Suddenly, he reaches inside his cloak. Both elders look at the celestial disciple's hand, astonished. Returning to the scene inside the temples of hell, Jiamo stands before something illuminated from above. It is a dagger enveloped in electricity. He gazes at the beautiful blade glowing with electricity. The ex-commander reaches his hand toward it as some of the lightning touches his fingers. He looks at it with a mix of admiration and shock. Finally placing his hand on the dagger, he begins to get electrified. As he experiences an intense shock, many bolts of lightning start emanating from his body and the dagger. He screams in pain while he tries to pull it out of the stone. Putting even more strength into his arm, he struggles to forcefully pull it out. He continues to scream in pain but persists in removing it. The celestial disciple finally manages to pull it out as bolts of electricity surge through his body. Showing them the dagger, the Phantom Assassin asks if Xunwang is referring to this. Both are extremely shocked to realize that the dagger is real and is right in front of them. Looking at it, the old assassin calls it the Blue Blade. The Guardian thinks that this is the true proof that the Phantom Assassin reached the end of the temples of hell. Suddenly, both kneel before the celestial disciple. Kneeling, the Guardian shouts that they bow before the great leader, while the old assassin says he salutes the great leader. Confused, the protagonist asks what they mean by great leader. Chunwei informs him that the blue blade is the proof that he is the supreme leader of the Great Assassin Sect. The protagonist asks if what he's saying is that for 200 years, the blue blade's power has always been hidden within the temples of hell. The guardian then says that as long as the spirit of the Great Assassin Sect does not fade, the power will always remain alive. The old assassin then asks Jiyomo to channel his Kai into the blue blade. Confused, he looks at the blade, wondering mentally if he should do it. He begins to channel his Kai into the blade. He is surprised to see that the blade once again begins to overflow with lightning. Suddenly, cuts surrounded by electricity appear in the air. The cuts form a symbol above his head, with a six-armed woman at its center. The old assassin calls it the Blue Azura. He says that this is a pattern only the assassin who has passed through the 10 temples of hell and become the owner of the blue blade can create. The Guardian, astonished, says that the Phantom Assassin who can create the Ashura pattern is supreme among all other assassins in the Central Plains. Looking at them, Jiyomo says that many people do not know about the Phantom Assassin and wonders if even these people would still follow the orders of the leader assassin. The old master says that the newer assassins may not know, but those with over 100 years of tradition eagerly await the supreme leader. The Guardian says that if he gathers all the elder assassins under his leadership, the newer assassins will naturally follow him. Still holding the dagger, he says that just like 200 years ago, they could make an agreement with the Murim League. Still kneeling, the legendary assassin says that the leader can stop them. Looking at all those still kneeling, he says that he doesn't have the capacity to take on such responsibilities. He confesses that he is very busy after learning his master's martial arts techniques. Looking at him, Chunwei asks why he decided to learn from such a master. He says he wanted to become strong, and for that, he needed to become as free as the wind. Looking at him, the old assassin says that if that's the case, he can become twice as strong to be twice as free. Jiyomo is surprised by his words while also feeling irritated. Macri says that strength is not gained through freedom alone and asks him to continue as the Phantom Assassin, leading the rest of the assassins. The Elder continues, saying that he can create strong bonds with them and become a great and powerful wind. Still looking at both of them, he concludes that this must be the best option. He remembers his master, saying that he was the strongest of all, but with the numerous enemies who attacked him together, he had no chance. Recalling a battle, he says that if he continues this way, he will only be destroyed by the bloodthirsty group or the Great Master's castle. Looking at his blade, he says he will become the supreme leader until he finds another worthy owner for it. Both elders lower their heads in respect. They pledge eternal loyalty to the Phantom Assassin. Soso is surprised by the recent events as she watches both elders swear their loyalty. She says that the emergence of the Phantom Assassin will turn the world's power hierarchy upside down. As the moon illuminated the dark night, a carriage traveled along a road surrounded by forest. The carriage was escorted by 4 armed soldiers. 2 of them become alarmed, hearing a noise. Suddenly, a wave of daggers flies in their direction. Both are struck by the blades and fall to the ground, lifeless. Their comrades, not much different, are also struck by the surprise attack. Both soldiers fall dead around the carriage, which halts abruptly. Someone quickly exits, trying to escape the attack. It appears to be an elder from one of the noble families, desperately trying to run. But the man who launched the attack runs toward him. The man simply attacks him from behind, completely impaling him. The elder falls to the ground dead. The long-haired man sheathes his sword, saying that the contract is complete. Suddenly, a hawk flies above his head, catching his attention. He extends his arm for the hawk to land. Attached to the hawk's leg is a letter addressed to the man. The letter states that the great leader has returned. The man is surprised, thinking this must be the second coming. In another location, still in the dark of night, a man had just eliminated several people. In his hand, still stained with blood, was the same note sent to the other. As blood splattered near a cherry tree, someone remarked that they killed the assassins. A man is executed by an assassin with a single strike. As his body falls to the ground, the assassin rises. He looks at his victim while someone says they have ordered the Great Assassin Sect to assemble. In the morning, amid a cluster of houses, a white flag is raised atop a roof. A door suddenly begins to open. From behind it emerges the Phantom Assassin. Someone welcomes the great warrior and asks the elder to take a seat. The elder, fearful and nervous, politely declines, saying he is fine. Soso, who was present, asks the man to provide the information he has gathered. The man then says that the woman he was instructed to find is named Suoyang. Thoughtfully, as he looks at the man, Jiyomo repeats the woman's name. The man explains that she caught Muak's attention while working at one of the temples in the Sikwon Castle. He informs that she joined the bloodthirsty group, but she is very quiet, and unless Taemuak himself escorts her, she never leaves Dongwon, the deepest part of the old palace. We see the woman looking at the horizon from the palace balcony. The protagonist states that, fortunately, she is still alive. He thinks that since the Great Master will continue to use her to gather information, sooner or later, she will be discovered. Before that happens, he must take her away. Still seated, the Phantom Assassin asks if no one suspected the fact that the man was gathering so much information about her. Nervously, the man says he only collected bits of information, never asking directly, so they had no reason to suspect him. Soso places a pouch of coins on the table. She looks at the man, saying that this task was certainly not easy. He thanks her as he takes the money, and Soso instructs him to keep an eye on the woman until their next meeting. Jiyomo says he needs a detailed map of the bloodthirsty group's headquarters, the ones actually made by them with all the secret passages and details. So, shocked, asks if he is planning to go alone to rescue her. He says he owes her and will go alone. Even more shocked, she questions if he is really serious. She explains that a detailed map of the bloodthirsty Groot's headquarters is beyond the reach of the Howl family and that she can't obtain it openly. He thinks that the Howl family surely has confidential information, but So opposes the idea of him going alone. The celestial disciple stands up, bidding her farewell and saying he will leave first. With a trembling and nervous voice, she calls out to him. So tells Jeomho that if he really doesn't want to give up, he should send a request to the Golden Apsara. Confused, he asks who the Golden Apsara is. So informs him that it is a secret intelligence organization of the Imperial Palace. He is surprised to learn that it belongs to the Imperial Palace. She explains that there are over 180,000 pieces of information about the Central Plains in the palace, and if there is a detailed map of the bloodthirsty Groot's headquarters, it will certainly be there. He asks if they would really accept a request from a commoner. Looking at him, So says that if he reveals himself as the Phantom Assassin, they will certainly comply. Looking at her, irritated and suspicious, he asks if she wants him to use his position as leader of the Assassin Sect. The Phantom Assassin thanks her while asking her not to tell anything to the elders, to which she agrees. Looking at him, So assumes that if the two elders find out, they will definitely kill her. Still in Fallen Moon Village, Jeomho enters the property where the two elders are. The Guardian asks where Jeomho has been. Looking at the two elders, he lies saying he was taking a walk. The Guardian says that the Supreme Leader cannot roam alone and asks him to inform them the next time he plans to leave. Changing the subject, he mentions that the warriors of the Fallen Moon Village seem different. The legendary assassin confirms this, stating that 12 descendants of the Great Sect have come for him. Jeomho asks if they are all sect leaders, to which the Guardian denies, saying only 3 are, and the rest are either disciples or lone warriors. Looking at the elders, he affirms that they are all great warriors as they have not lost the spirit of the Great Sect even while fighting alone. Macri looks at the old assassin and remarks that he also fought alone when he was young. As they walk out the door, he calls the two elders to meet the others. They walk side by side through the town. They arrive at a courtyard where many people are present. 2 elders are being escorted by 3 young warriors. On the other side, 6 seemingly solitary warriors await them. Even a woman is present, and she looks surprised at their arrival. Both the 2 elders and the Phantom Assassin gaze at the crowd before them. The legendary assassin shouts angrily, declaring that the Supreme Leader is there and that they must bow before him. But contrary to Chen Wang's expectations, everyone remains standing, staring at them. Macri, growing extremely angry, asks what kind of disrespect this is, ordering them all to show their respect immediately. One of the elders demands they show proof first, with one of his soldiers saying they will only believe it once he shows the blue blade. The legendary assassin asks the Supreme Leader to show them the blue blade. Jeomho places his hand on the dagger, drawing it and revealing its blue glow. Both elders, along with the soldier who asked for proof, are surprised to see that it is real. The other 2 soldiers look at the blade in shock, wondering if it is truly the blue dagger. The 2 elders, accompanied by their soldiers, kneel and pay their respects to the Phantom Assassin. However, some of the assassins still look at him suspiciously, with one even laughing. The woman looks at the scene, displeased. Hyunwei begins cursing them, saying they should have done so without even asking for proof. While murmuring in dissatisfaction, the man who was smiling stands up. He says that they've only heard of the blue blade, but even so, they cannot say for sure if the dagger is real. The woman named Jorim asks him to forget about the blue blade, saying she doesn't even understand why she has to become a disciple of the Great Assassin Sect. One of the assassins agrees with her, saying they should question this. Growing even more angry and indignant, the Guardian asks how they dare. One of the men who had been kneeling says that the Phantom Assassin is the Supreme Leader and that he should not be rude just because he is a young, ignorant man. Jeomho calmly sheathes his dagger. While smiling, the Phantom Assassin affirms that they are right. After all, 200 years is enough time for them to forget their ancestors. Confused, the elder asks why he is saying this. He draws his sword and adds that in those 200 years, no one has ever passed through the 10 temples as he did, nor become a Phantom Assassin like him. Everyone is startled, wondering if he is going to demonstrate his abilities. The woman, a bit nervous, mentions that they discovered he is also a celestial disciple. She observes that if he uses the martial arts of the Celestial Palace, it may be difficult for the other assassins to accept him. The Phantom Assassin looks at them and says that they probably think the Great Assassin Sect is a joke. The elders question whether he really thinks that using only the killing techniques will be enough. While lightly swinging his sword, he asks if they believe he is overestimating his achievement of passing through the 10 temples of hell. He makes a single move, glaring at everyone. They stand still, not understanding, after he delivers a strike in the air. Suddenly, the clothes of the man standing many meters away are cut. Everyone is shocked, wondering what just happened. The man admits that he didn't even see him use his sword, yet his clothes were cut. The woman suddenly notices something. She realizes that her hairpin has also been cut. As a piece of her hairpin falls, she looks at Jeomho, standing with his sword in hand meters away. Looking at the ground, she thinks it's impossible. With a sarcastic tone, he asks if they are embarrassed for being caught off guard. Pointing his blade at them, Jeomho says he will give them a chance, and they should attack him first. Both assassins, angry, draw their weapons, preparing to attack him. They begin to run towards him desperately. Mach and Jorim close the distance, preparing to strike the phantom assassin. The man, while running to attack, says he will make him regret it. Suddenly, all that can be seen is a blur, as if Jiyomo himself had become the wind. He simply vanishes from in front of his enemies before they can even comprehend what happened. As Mach lands on the ground, he wonders how he lost sight of him without even blinking. Suddenly, 2 slashes cut through the air. The man's belt is sliced in half, and the woman's entire hairpin is severed. Both look down, unable to understand what just happened, stunned and frozen with fear. Behind them, he asks if they plan to continue, surprising them with his sudden appearance. Looking at her partner, the woman recalls that he is known for his discretion and subtlety. Yet even he couldn't see Jiyomo's movements, not even when his clothes were cut. She wonders if the phantom assassin is on another level. The legendary assassin begins to laugh, asking if they now acknowledge the supreme leader. They look at him, mentally admitting that they have no choice but to recognize him. Surprisingly, something catches the phantom assassin's attention, causing him to turn his head. On a rooftop, 2 mysterious figures stand, both carrying swords on their backs. Suddenly, the 2 figures disappear. They both land behind the celestial disciple, creating a hostile atmosphere. He looks at his 2 new adversaries, confused. The 2 men, each carrying a large sword on their back, are Ha and Qian. One of the elders informs that these are the twins who rank 3rd in the Central Plains. All the warriors present recall that these are assassins who charge 1,000 gold coins for a single assassination. The guardian says he heard they were on a mission and asks what they are doing here. The man wearing a blue cloak says they heard that the phantom assassin had appeared. The other, wearing a beige cloak, says that's why they finished their work quickly. Mach thinks they say this as if they just finished having dinner and remarks that now he understands why they are called future phantom assassins. He also concludes that these 2 will not easily accept the phantom assassin. The legendary assassin commands the 2 to pay their respects to the supreme leader. Hal looks at them, asking what they mean by supreme leader. Qian, with sarcasm, asks if he truly claims to be a phantom assassin. The man in the blue cloak places his hand on his sword, preparing to draw it. Pointing it at the celestial disciple, they say they will recognize him if he breaks their swords. He sighs lightly and smiles, saying, "All right." They grow agitated at the casual way he responded to them. As Jiyomo swings his sword, he says that if they wish to die, he will grant them that desire. The men prepare to fight as they call him arrogant. Fragments of stone float in the air. Suddenly, everyone is terrified as fragments fly in all directions, caused only by the release of the aura from the 3 opponents. Qian Wang orders everyone to step back. As Mach runs, he thinks it will be dangerous even to be near this battle. Everyone retreats behind the elders. The legendary assassin says that if Jiyomo truly manages to defeat the twins in front of the younger warriors, they will have no choice but to follow him. As he prepares to attack, he declares that Jiyomo is insane for blocking both of their ki alone. His brother shouts that they will see how he handles this situation. Observing his enemies, the protagonist is surprised by something. Looking at them, he realizes that they are both delivering strikes in the air, causing damage from a distance. He sees his enemies' attacks approaching through the air. With relative ease, the phantom assassin deflects them all with his blade. As both of them attack the celestial disciple from a distance, Mach watches the battle, wondering if this is the technique of the invisible sword. Both elders shout for everyone to remain still, as it is extremely dangerous. Elder Macri begins to summon power into his hands. The other elder does the same. They extend their hands, creating a sort of barrier to block the invisible cuts. With that, they form a kind of sphere that stops all the invisible attacks. The boy is even more surprised to see the elders defending against the invisible sword technique with an indestructible shield. Both elders are straining to maintain the shield, extending their hands and enduring the impact of the attacks. Mach concludes that Jiyomo truly deserves the title of King of Assassins, as even the legendary assassin Qian Wang recognized him as the supreme leader. Jorim watches all this in silence. The man in the beige cloak asks how Jiyomo can call himself the supreme leader of assassins if he hasn't even lived like one. Suddenly, both brothers vanish in the blink of an eye, leaving a crater where they once stood. They appear above the supreme leader. Qian prepares to strike, saying they cannot recognize him. Ha says they will cut him in half. With that, both twins unleash an attack from above that brightens the entire area. A massive attack from the invisible sword technique descends upon the phantom assassin, who remains standing in the same spot. Angrily, he looks at the approaching attack without even moving. Jiyomo glares at them with even more rage and disapproval. The attack finally hits, causing a massive explosion. The explosion is so immense that it is visible throughout the village. The 2 elders give their all to withstand the pressure of the impact. Around the guardian's shield, everything is destroyed. But even the shield created by the 2 elders begins to tremble under the force. The warriors are astonished by the power, noting that it is strong enough to shake an indestructible shield, and they comment that the twins' strength lives up to their name. Mach asks if they managed to wound the supreme leader, to which one of the warriors responds that the twins' attack has never failed before, so it is very likely. Suddenly, Jorim is shocked as she sees something. As the twins finally cease their attack, debris and fragments fall all around. The twins are extremely exhausted after delivering such a blow, but when they finally look at the spot where their enemy stood, they are stunned. The phantom assassin stands unharmed in the same place without a single scratch. He calmly walks toward them, showing no sign of injury or distress. To their surprise, he begins to brush the dust off his cloak. They are shocked, asking how this could happen, They used all their power, and yet he wasn't even scratched. They continue staring at him, barely able to lift their swords. With a punishing gaze, he commands them to kneel before him. Both are utterly shocked and fearful upon hearing his tone. They drop their swords to the ground, saying they feel like mere specks of dust. In front of a mountain, while kneeling, they both shout that they bow before the supreme leader. There is the reflection that it is as if they were merely dust particles in front of a mountain. Then everyone bows to the supreme leader, and they greet the man who wields a great sword in his hands. Nearby, two men observe the scene from a distance. They say that what happened was expected of the supreme leader. Suddenly, a group of young men appears in the skies. They all fall near the leader and those who are bowing. The group also follows the same decision, bowing at the man's feet and greeting him. They explain that the twin swordsmen who rank third among the warriors have sworn loyalty to the Phantom Assassin, and that now the greatest assassin sects are subordinate to him. Since after abandoning the warrior's life, the previous generations who had hidden themselves all gathered under the command of the Phantom Assassin. With this, all the assassins were brought together in one place. Now all kinds of information networks are being mobilized to reveal the identity of the mysterious man. The Moyang family is shown. Around a table, they ask if the fact is really true. Reading a paper, the young woman says that the supreme leader of the great sect is the disciple of the celestial palace, therefore Yeonjeomho is the Phantom Assassin. The man with her says that he obtained the information from the Howl family, which transmitted such a message with urgency. Thinking about it, the girl says that the great martial castle guarded the entrance to the gates of hell, where Yeonjeomho was last seen. Then the young man says that some time ago, the soldiers who guarded this gate died in a natural disaster, leaving the young woman in doubt. And the man says he thinks that the deaths happened precisely when escaped. Placing the paper on the table, the woman asks if the martial castle thinks the same as they do. Secretly, the man reveals that he confirmed that the information network of the martial castles is heading towards the great assassin sect. With this, he is practically certain that Jeomho is the Phantom Assassin. Meanwhile, in the great martial castle, a man stands still and thinks that Eun really is the young man they were looking for. He thinks that in the face of the war against the Blood Group, he cannot judge whether the young man's survival is a good or bad thing. The Fallen Moon Village is presented. They say that the Phantom Sword is a technique learned in the 10 Temples of Hell, and that the first form of the object is the Order of Destruction. The Supreme Leader appears testing his sword while having such thoughts. He says that the second form is 10 swings of destruction. The third form is multiple lights of destruction. However, according to the young man, only the fourth form, which pertains to annihilation, remains. Frustrated, he thinks that even after the Master's Key was infused into his body, he still cannot unleash such power. Therefore, he realizes that he needs to increase his Kai through training to be able to use such a form. A group of men interrupts the young man and calls him. They ask if the leader has finished his sword practice. Worried, the young man asks if the Supreme Leader needs massages due to fatigue. Before he can respond, the man notices the presence of a person at the entrance of his house. It is a girl that leaves him confused about why she is there. Trying to understand what it is about, the leader orders his men to leave the place. He lifts off the ground and jumps quite high onto the house's roof. One of his subordinates screams in fright at what he sees and asks where the man is going. Later, they ask if the Supreme Leader has left the house. The elder at the table asks if the men who were escorting him followed the young man. In response, the informant says that they followed him but could not find him, so they returned. Curious, another man asks if the Supreme Leader has still not returned, and he is informed that he has not yet come back to the place. Irritated, the man slams the table where he was drinking his tea. Shouting, he asks what the informant means when he says that the leader has still not returned and if he still does not know where the young man is. Apologizing, the servant says he will immediately resume the search, but the elder says to let it go. After all, he does not understand how someone as simple as the young man could search for someone that even the men of the twin swords could not find. Questioning himself, the other elder wonders where he could have gone so late. Several laughs are heard as people walk through the city center. A woman offers drinks at the door of the Moonflower pub and says that whoever buys a drink will be served by a courtesan. A mysterious man appears and hears the invitation to enter the bar and watch the performance of beautiful women. He approaches the place and questions why the girl is secretly asking for his presence. The young man remembers the contact he had with the girl at his house, and that she instructed him to go to the pub and look for a courtesan named Danny. Thoughtful, the young man believes that the martial arts castle group and the sect leaders must have already discovered that he is the Phantom Assassin. Therefore, going to the bar could be a trap to capture him, considering that they had previously lost his trail. He concludes that there is no way for the group to lure him into a place with so many people, but he will only know for sure when he meets the young woman. At the entrance of the bar, they welcome him and ask if he is looking for a specific courtesan. The leader says Danny's name and is led through the corridors of the pub toward the woman. In the room with the young woman, the man who brought him there takes his leave. Nanny also welcomes the young man standing before her. Not understanding very well, he asks who the woman is. She introduces herself and says she is from the House of Delight. The information makes the leader thoughtful. It is explained that although this house exists, its existence is not revealed to anyone, and it is composed only of women. Just like its name, the place is known for all its courtesans. More precisely, the young man explains that all the informants of the house were trained as women of the night and infiltrated the Central Plains. These women have even entered places frequented only by high-ranking individuals. However, he concludes that no one can say for sure who these informants are. Even the owner of the brothel he's in could be someone from the House of Delight, and the courtesan who just arrived could also be an informant from the place. The leader explains that the women are highly trained, and that is why their identities are never revealed. Knowing that these young women are human in some cases, they may make mistakes and have their secret exposed. But if that happens, they are killed. He also says that this is why information about the leader of the organization is always shrouded in mystery. Nanhee interrupts the young man's thoughts, saying that her mistress is waiting for him. The leader is taken to a room and sees a woman standing near a table. Quickly, he believes she is the one responsible for the organization. In the garden of the martial castle, noises are heard. Someone is training in the courtyard of the place. Wielding a sword, the young man practices various strikes and shouts as he exerts his strength. One of the strikes is so strong that the ground beneath him cracks into several pieces. A concrete pillar also suffers structural damage and collapses after the man's attack. Closing his eyes and concentrating, he says that everything happened as expected, and he says that there is still a subtle discrepancy between martial skills and his kai. He knows that to improve, he will need to practice his breathing techniques for a year, and then his abilities will be perfect. However, the young man knows that he is at war with the blood group and cannot practice anything as he is always on alert for possible attacks. Even so, he keeps thinking about Yeonji-Omho and says that thanks to that bastard, the blood group's attack was delayed. Back at the brothel, the leader is sitting across from the mistress. He questions why he was summoned to the place by the woman. Before starting to speak, the woman says that she needs to deliver a message left by the former owner of the organization. Without wasting time, the lady says that in life, the former owner deeply loved the master of the Celestial Palace, and that she never expressed her feelings, only keeping everything she felt to herself. But due to the fall of the palace and the man's disappearance, the mistress suffered for the rest of her life. The leader says he did not know that his master was involved in such a way with the House of Delight. Determined, the woman asks how much the boy trusts Ye Qianwang. Confused, the young man reflects that he did not expect that question and thinks that the man is serving him at this moment, and that he is making a great effort for the revival of the Great Assassin Sect. The woman asks again if the young man deeply trusts Qianwang. Responding, the leader says that thanks to him, he was able to quickly assume the position of sect leader. But the mistress returns the question, asking if after the organization is revived, the man will still need the leader. Continuing, she asks if the young man believes that Ya Qianwang will continue being in a movie for the rest of his life. Standing up from the table, the leader says that if he had to compare the mistress with the man in terms of scale, the weight would be much greater on the young man's side. The mistress becomes thoughtful about the young man's response. Observing from the door, a girl makes a remark about the conversation she is overhearing. She approaches, saying that Ya Qianwang and Deng Macri are part of the young man's life and death. The young woman also says that her mistress was too hasty for what should have been only the first meeting. The leader is confused by that conversation and does not understand what she meant. Then the mistress explains that the girl is her disciple and the one who will become the leader of the House of Delight. Quickly, the girl introduces herself as Seol Yanhwa. Observing the girl, the young man finds her very beautiful and thinks that if she attends to high-ranking officials, it will surely reveal all their information. Therefore, he concludes that the true power of a House of Delight is beauty. Addressing the man, the mistress says that her disciple was correct and that she was too hasty in speaking with the leader. He realizes that she does not want him to fight against Qianwang and then questions what the house wants from him. Quickly, the mistress says that they want to be the young man's information network. The young man does not understand why they specifically chose his sect, but he confirms whether the House of Delight truly wants him for that activity. The mistress affirms that Yeonji-Omho will become the greatest warrior, and when he reaches that position, he must allow the organization to control all information. He thinks that the women doing this is a great way to demonstrate power and authority. Making a comparison, he believes that his role is the same as having the right to deliver goods, and that if the transportation routes are blocked, trade will be paralyzed. Speaking to the two girls, says that he does not want to become the greatest warrior in the world. Emphatically, the mistress says that he cannot live as he wishes in Murim, and that the house is betting everything on the young man. Continuing the conversation, the woman says that one of their bets is a secret that Qianwang is hiding. She states that the man has another identity outside the assassin sect, and that he must reveal the information to the protagonist. Ian is doubtful about what he hears, and the mistress continues, saying that he belongs to an organization called the Golden Apsara. The protagonist realizes that she is talking about the imperial family's secret organization. Curious, she asks how the young man knows about it, and he says he is considering going to the location to gather information. The mistress continues, saying that Qianwang has a grand plan in mind. She says that if the man does not want to serve the boy, he will lend a bit of his power and then disappear, which is why he hides the Golden Apsara. Trying to help the young man, the two say they can provide information about the organization to facilitate the search. Ian mumbles something about the blood group. Then he says that he needs a map showing all the secret passages of the Blood Palace. Back in the garden of the Martial Castle, everything is destroyed. A young man observes the place and believes that everything was left in ruins due to a storm of rain and wind. Quickly, He says that he needs to inform the owners of the place about what happened. A person appears behind the young man and asks if he is talking about the blood group. Before he can respond, he is struck by a sword in his back, but he manages to defend himself and engages in combat with the mysterious person. However, he is unable to keep up and is eliminated. More people from the castle observe the scene and closely watch the assassin. An order is given for them to run and flee from the woman standing near them. Reaching the rooftop, they find a man standing right there. The group is startled, realizing they have nowhere to go. Drawing his sword, the young man turns to face the others. It is Eunjeomho, who looks at the young men with an unfriendly expression. The warriors charge together to kill him. Without fear, the man advances alone into battle. His movements are fast and precise. One by one, his opponents are taken down before they even realize it. He slides across the ground to stop, and behind him, the men are being struck down. When he stops, he finds a woman standing with her back to him. He tells her that the swordsmen of the blood group are listening to his father's military training hall. The woman says that they were also bad, so there was no need to curse them. Smiling, he says that after the war, his little sister became bold. Without looking at him, she says that she would be even bolder and would return home. He says that Eun has become the leader of the Great Assassin Sect and the Phantom Assassin, that a natural disaster helped him escape, but that he would not be so lucky after they annihilated the group. After the group was gone, he would die by his hands. His sister remained with her back to him despite his words. He looked at her with suspicion. She was thinking about Eunjeomho. In the village, the man leaped across the rooftops until he landed in front of a house. Inside, the elders stepped out, startled. Himwang asked him where he had been all night and why he hadn't informed them. Eun asked if they had been waiting for him all night. The elders said that many assassins were not loyal to him, and it was still dangerous. Macri said their leader was not a child and had great skill. No one would dare fight him. He told them not to worry so much, but the other man still had doubts. The warrior passed by them, asking them to come inside and have some tea. Inside the house, the three sat at the table. Deung handed him a cup of tea, telling him to think of it as an old man's irritation. He asked him to tell him where he planned to go in the future, and Eun said he understood. He commented that he would let it go. Suddenly changing the subject and straightening himself, the man said he had a question for them. With seriousness, he asked if they knew about the Golden Apsara. One of them said it was the first time he had heard that name, while the other remained silent. The man pressed the question again. After thinking for a moment, Yes said he did not remember hearing about it, but his reaction caught attention. Am knew that the elder was aware of the Apsara. Macri asked what it was about. Jeomo wanted to find a member of the imperial family and was told to seek out that organization. He was told it was a secret organization related to the family. He turned to Qianwang and asked if he had any idea how to contact them. He replied that the assassin sect had no ties to the imperial family, so it would be difficult. The warrior said he would search for them alone again. Sometime later, a woman appeared at their door, intriguing the elders. She was bringing breakfast for the supreme leader at Macri's request. Ye thought it would be better to assign a sworn assassin rather than a mere girl. Then he asked her to take care of the leader with all her heart, and she nodded. After that, he told her to proceed, and they continued on their way. Inside the breakfast tray, there was a letter. Taking it, the warrior asked what it was. The woman said her master had instructed her to give him the letter. Looking at the pages, he thought it had barely been 2 hours since they had separated. On them were several drawings that caught his attention. The drawings depicted secret passages built decades ago, along with the most recent ones. He was surprised and said they deserved to dream of monopolizing the entire information network. A ship was at sea with 2 women at the bow. The leader commented on the other woman spending 100,000 gold to buy a map of the secret passages. She said that if she had waited a day, she would have spent only 50,000, but her stubbornness had cost her a lot of money. Seal retorted that her stubbornness would reveal how much money they had saved. Since they had provided fast information, Yun was on their side. The leader thought he would be impressed that they had information that even the Howe family didn't possess. Placing her hand on the woman's shoulder, the elder said she deserved to be the next mistress of the House of Pleasure. Then she asked why the warrior wanted the map, and Seal guessed he wanted to help the Grand Marshal Castle. She asked if Ewan had not been close to the 4th princess of the castle in the past. The leader said they would find out soon enough. Yanwa looked out at the sea from the edge of the bow. She thought that despite being a group that used beauty to obtain and sell information, it was their chance to become the exclusive information network of the world's greatest warrior. In an open area, a man used his sword to attack the warrior. He prepared his move and struck the man's arm before he could advance. Vishra fell to the ground, dropping his sword. Around them, other men observed. One of them was impressed that he had defeated the #1 assassin in Sichuan. Another asked if he really expected the supreme leader who had defeated the twin swordsmen to lose. They were even more astonished after hearing that. The warrior shouted that Gushira's people were not qualified to serve the leader and expelled them. As the loser was carried away, the spectators began to boo him. Catching the attention of the elders, one of them asked how much longer they would allow unworthy people to challenge the leader. Macri responded that it was merely a way to spread the events to other assassins. Giacomo appeared, sheathing his sword, and said he would leave the sect for a while. Ye was startled and asked what he meant. Everyone else around began shouting for the leader. He says that he would be away for at least 10 days and at most a month. The other man tells him that he should not go as the assassins were returning one after another. That as a leader, he should be devoted to gathering all the people to revive the great assassin sect. In the middle of the crowd, people start saying what a supreme leader should do. Sucking shouts that leaving in such a manner is neglecting his duties. After that, Yun advances in anger. He gets close to the man, startling him, and lands a punch on his chin. Then he goes after the other two who spoke about him and takes them down as well. The others become nervous upon seeing the scene. Shinwang becomes furious at Yun's actions. He was so fast that they could not even see him move. Hao laughs, saying that such behavior was expected from the supreme leader. But Qian covers his mouth, telling him to stay quiet and assess the situation. In front of everyone, 3 men lay on the ground. Their leader says that people will gather wherever he goes. Everyone becomes alert at his words. He says that those who follow him will continue to do so without being asked. That was the Great Assassin Sect. Sometime later, Ye was breaking things, cursing the man as a bastard. But even if he hid from his eyes, he would not escape his grasp. Then he thinks that their relationship was coming to an end. At that moment, they were against each other. Meanwhile, at the Blood Palace, men were guarding the premises. Meanwhile, women were cleaning one of the rooms. One of them finds a piece of paper on the table and keeps it for herself. 2 of the women were chatting about eating rice cakes later, where they suddenly see an army of men approaching them. One of them says they were bold to block the warrior's path. Bowing, they apologize. The men continue on their way, leaving them nervous. One of the servants says she is relieved that they left without causing any trouble. However, one of the men turns back and strikes her in the back. The other 2 are shocked by the scene. While one screams, the other quickly flees. The one who stayed behind is also attacked by the warrior. The man who struck the women alerts his comrades about the fugitive. The men stop running and start calling her a rat. Around them, a servant's clothing is thrown to the ground. Looking up, they see a figure in the darkness watching them. She had several knives between her fingers. With speed, she leaps at them, launching the weapons as she moves. The warriors use their swords to deflect the knives. When they strike them, they realize the knives were made of wood. The woman lands on the ground, creating a gust of wind that sends the wooden shards flying toward them. She takes advantage of the moment when they cover their eyes to escape up the wall of the house. Outside, a young woman was picking flowers when she heard a noise. It was an emergency signal indicating intruders in the palace. She becomes worried, but another girl says that the warriors should have already captured the intruder, that it was amazing how they could find hidden criminals in the palace. Beside her, another woman tells her that she's annoying and to keep quiet. At that moment, the 3 hear a loud noise. The young woman sees the warrior being chased by the army. As she flees, their eyes meet. In midair, one of the men's swords pierces her. She is horrified by the scene before her. The fugitive falls into the flower field beside her. Terrified, the servant shields the girl from seeing the sight. The warrior descends into the field. The others follow, standing face to face with the young woman. He points his blood-stained sword at her face and asks who she is. Under pressure, the woman begins to feel unwell, being supported by the other. The servant explains that she was staying at the Dongwon residence in the oldest part of the palace. He thinks that she must be the wife of Tamok, whom he keeps hidden. That she was beautiful, and it was no wonder the old man valued her so much. Then he orders the others to examine the girl's body, as she may have hidden information. The young woman watches as the other is carried away, following her with her eyes. At the House of Pleasure, men were talking about wine and stones. An appears at the door of one of the girls. A Korsan welcomes him. She introduces herself as Yusoni and says she received a message. Sitting at the table, the warrior asks how many people were in that house. The letter he received along with the map said that the Korsan could help him infiltrate the blood group. She responds that all the Korsans belong to the House of Pleasure. He asks if that means all of them. Sumi answers yes, even those of the first class. Jiomo thinks that if they are of the first class, their power must be great enough. At that moment, they hear a noise outside. One of the elders was lying on the ground among the shards of a broken jar. He accuses the men of kidnapping innocent people and now disrespecting the elderly. Getting up, he points a finger at one of them, asking if they were disrespecting him because he was old. The man tries to place a hand on his shoulder to discuss the matter outside, but he fails because the elder dodges before he can. The elder jumps back, throwing himself onto a table. The one who was trying to talk begins sweating nervously. On the ground, the elder starts shouting that he was pushed and that his back hurts. Irritated, the man begins questioning him and calling him a beggar. The elder starts writhing and screaming for someone to save him, claiming he was dying. His plan was working because one of the customers asked how they could do such a thing to the old man. Hearing that, the servants start to worry because they had done nothing. One of them grabs the elder by the collar, saying that he should die. Still playing the victim, the elder shouts that it was the last day of his life and that Yama had seen everything. Then he hears someone telling him that they had mastered the divine intoxication technique. He sees a man on the stairs and thinks that he had modified it, yet someone still recognized it. Yan calls him and says he would serve a drink to the master of Gabang. In the room, the 3 of them sat at the table. The elder asks who he is, and Yan replies that he was a guest who had come for a drink. He then asks how the man recognized his techniques at first glance. Jiomo says he was more curious about why the elder of Gabang was putting on an act. The elder asks if it wasn't obvious why a beggar would dress up to visit a restaurant. Sivni asks if it was for a free meal, but the elder replies that he needed money. She asks if he couldn't get it from other branches of the sect, since although it was open to poor beggars, a situation was different for an elder. There were at least 20 elders under the Dragon Head Association, and he was one of the best. He says that if he told the other branches, they would accommodate him, but he replies that he couldn't because it was a private matter. Yu is surprised by the whole situation and asks how much money he needed. Without looking at her, the elder replies that he needed 1,000 gold stones. If it were 100 stones, the House of Pleasure might give them out of kindness, but 1,000 was too much. Eon comments that they would be rich if they earn 1,000 stones just by asking once. The woman says she was curious about why the elder needed so much money. He replies that he was in love with a young woman. Both Eon and Seonyi think at the same time that it was a lie. But Jiyomo could feel his disdain when the elder said he needed the money. Eon says he would give him the money if he gave him a gambang payment token in exchange. The token could only be possessed by the elders and young successors. Serious, the elder asks if he knew what a payment token was. Eon says he wouldn't make an unreasonable request. At night, he sat alone at the table, looking at the token. He thought that the elder must have needed the money so badly that he gave him the object. He wondered when his own story would unfold, but for now, the blood group was his priority. Inside a cave, Wu Yangxiek was meditating. Energy begins to flow from his body, awakening him. He raises his hand toward a wall. The wall begins to absorb the energy until it starts to crack. Destruction Mara was the tension that developed in any sound or movement. With that, he had reached the 7th stage of the heavenly demon's will. At night, 2 men stood at the cave entrance. They hear footsteps approaching, making them nervous. Yangxiek appears, wearing his cloak, walking toward the exit. Their master had completed his training after 3 months. The 2 kneel, offering their congratulations to him. One of them says they would alert everyone about his departure. But the man simply places his hand on his head without saying a word. At that moment, lightning begins to flow from his head. Yu begins absorbing the man's energy. He only stops when the man is left as a withered corpse on the ground. That was the soul absorption technique. Realizing what happened, the other man runs away in terror. His master runs after him. Not far away, he catches the warrior by the head. His soul is quickly drained. The man collapses on the ground in the same state as his comrade. If Yangxiek reached the 10th stage of the heavenly demon's will, he could completely subjugate the elders. The entire world would bow before his throne. One of the warriors reports to Gohong about what happened and that Yangxiek had gone to the Golden Devil district. He asks why he was being informed so late. He says that the guards who protected the fields have disappeared, and they have lost their master. The Golden Devil district was a place where people who deviated in their kai during training ended up. Hu breaks the chains in one of the rooms and finds the master, wondering why he was in that place. Immediately, he places his hand on the master's head and begins to absorb his soul. The other prisoners are alarmed by what they witness. Then Yangxiek starts taking them one by one. Throughout the night, Jiaomo was running through the trees. The oldest secret passage was built at the same time as the Blood Palace. Not long after, he arrives at the location. The old man from Gabang was also there, wandering around. Hiding, Yun wonders if the elder knew the young woman who lived there. As he walks, the elder senses something above him. High up in a tree, all the members of the Blood Army were standing on the branches. As soon as he notices them, they begin to descend. They all stop in front of the elder. Nervous, he asks to speak first. However, one of them charges at the elder, who quickly dodges. He insists on talking things through with words, but it doesn't work as they continue attacking. At that moment, he thinks he will truly die there. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tab's channel.